So these are the two scopes which has been included to your Spring 5.x series. And the only thing that we did right now, we marked this particular method with @lookup annotation. So what is Singleton Bean scope and what is Singleton design pattern? What are the differences? So this bean scope is application scope. So once this bean got created, it is going to be attached with the servlet context. So as I said, this particular topic is really famous for your interview. Whenever I'm defining the prototype scope, I also need to define a proxy. I need to define a AOP proxy. So might be it sounds confusing whenever you hear the proxy for the first time. Can I set up multiple dispatcher servlet for an application? And the answer is of course yes. You can create as many dispatcher servlet as you want. So not only we're going to learn bean scopes or different types of bean scopes that we have, also we are going to talk about what is a proxy object, what is the code generation library of Spring, or what is CGLIB. Hey there everyone, welcome back to another episode of Selenium Express, and in this video we are going to talk about bean scope. And well, this is one of the most asked video on my channel because this is the topic I skipped in my Spring MVC tutorial series and in my Spring Core tutorial series, right? Because I feel that was not basically the right time to tell you about the bean scope, because I feel it's need a little bit of more advanced knowledge to understand the scope of the bean, because there are 6 different scopes and I cannot skip all the scope, right? I cannot tell you just 2 scopes and I cannot skip rest 4, right? So I feel I'll make a different tutorial on bean scope covering all the 6 different scopes that we have. All right, so this is, as I said, one of the very important topic for your interview and also for your real-time project. So do not skip it. You have to understand this particular topic, and as I said, it is very important, right? So let's see what I'm going to cover in this particular tutorial. All right, so first of all, as I said, we have 6 different scope. All right, we have 6 different bean scope, starting from Singleton, prototype, request, session, application, and WebSocket. As you can see, all these 6 scopes that we have, I'm going to cover everything in this particular tutorial. This is not going to be a shortcut video. I'm going to spend around 3 hours explaining all these scopes to you, because I feel it is very important for interview and they'll be asking you a lot of questions, right? So I feel it is really important to cover all the glory details that we have on this topic. All right, so well, before I proceed, I just want to tell you that there is an update, okay, in Spring 5.x, or in the Spring 5 series. The current series of Spring is Spring 5, right, as of 2020 end. Okay, so in 2020 and 2021, obviously the 5.x series will run. So in this series they have not included the global session scope. Okay, so if you remember earlier, whenever in your interview somebody asked you, like, can you tell me about the bean scopes, you used to say we have 5 different scope: Singleton, prototype, request, session, and global session. So global session is the one which is not included to your Spring 5.x series. So this is the scope, global session, which is dropped from the Spring 5.x series. So there is no more global session scope in your bean. Okay, I mean in your bean scope there is no more global session scope. So whenever somebody asks you about the global session, they have dropped that particular scope and they have included 2 more new scopes, which are called application and the WebSocket. So these are the 2 scopes which has been included to your Spring 5.x series. So if you talk about this one, right, global session scope, the reason why they have removed it, because this is basically meant for the portlet programming or the portlet MVC, and I think there is no support provided by Spring MVC for portlet these days. And for Spring 5.x, as there is no portlet support from Spring MVC, or as Spring is not supporting the portlet these days, so they have completely removed the global session scope, because this is basically meant for the portlet MVC. all right, or the portlet programmings. So well, I'm not going to talk about the global session anyhow. I'm going to talk about this too, application and the WebSocket, which is newly included to your 5.x version of Spring. So obviously if you have a latest Spring application, obviously you can explore these scopes as well if you wanted to, play with these particular scopes, right? Alright, so as I said you, right, the main intention of making this video is doing some hands-on. So I know that you guys are right now comfortable with Spring Core, Spring MVC, you have done coding in Spring JDBC, you are well educated on Spring MVC Intermediate. Right now I feel that you have all the power to understand this particular concepts that I'm going to teach you in this particular video. So we'll be doing a lot of hands-on here. I'll be giving you different examples and scenarios we'll be looking at, so that we'll feel comfortable on this topic called bean scopes, right? Because we'll be going through different bean scopes by seeing different examples here. Alright, the second goal of this particular tutorial is making you familiar with the interview kind of questions, right? Because so as I said, this particular topic is really famous for your interview. So we'll cover a wide variety of interview questions, covering all different types of questions, because I have gathered a lot of questions and obviously I'm going to cover that in this particular video. So hands-on and the interview preparation is two objective of this particular mini course or the course or this particular 3 hours webinar or the tutorial. All right, whatever you want to say it, but this is what I'm going to do here in this particular video. Cool. So as I said, this is going to be an in-depth tutorial, right? So not only we're going to learn bean scopes or different types of bean scopes that we have, also we are going to talk about what is a proxy object, what is the code generation library of Spring, or what is CGLIB, what is AOP scoped proxy. We'll be also looking at the method injection, what is basically at lookup annotation, because this is very famous interview question. What is at lookup, what is method injection, all right? And also I'll be covering a lot of differences, just like Spring Singleton versus GOF Singleton. If you remember, we have a design pattern called Singleton design pattern provided by the GOF or the Gang of 4. So what is basically the difference between the Gang of 4 design pattern and also our Singleton bean scope? Because as I said, we have a scope here called Singleton. So what is Singleton bean scope and what is Singleton design pattern? What are the differences? Is there any differences between Singleton design pattern and Singleton scoped bean? And that's what we're going to learn in this particular video as well. And also I'm going to tell you the differences between the prototype and request scope. I'll be also compare the session and the request scope. And also I'll be telling you the differences between the servlet context and the web application context. Alright, so there are a lot of good things in the store. So let's go ahead and let's get our hands dirty by writing a lot of code. Okay. So anytime you feel like you are stuck with something, you wanted to ask some questions, then obviously you can visit to my website www.seleniumexpress.com. You can also email me to my email ID called seleniumexpress@gmail.com. You can join my private Facebook group, which is called Selenium Express Support. You can ask me on Instagram. My Insta ID is Selenium_Express, and also you can go to Facebook and search for Selenium Express, and you can message me if you have any doubts. And if you don't want to do all these things, just post a comment, man, in the comment section, and obviously I'm going to reply you there. So yeah, what to wait for? Let's go ahead and let's write some code. Alright, so before we proceed, there are a few things that I want to say you that, okay, do not only watch this particular tutorial, do practice, otherwise this is not going to be of any use. Okay, do practice, guys. Take breaks in between, do not watch it in one shot, take necessary breaks, do not rush, keep it simple, calm down and understand. Okay, enjoy it, have some fun. Okay, and obviously do practice. If you are getting stuck, just let me know, I'll be helping you. Okay, put it in my Selenium Express support Facebook group. Obviously I'm going to reply you there. And also one more thing, there is no face cam in this particular video, so you are not going to see me while coding. Hopefully that is manageable, because if you are a viewer of this particular channel, maybe you are pretty acquainted with that. So no face cam today, guys, bear with me. And obviously it will be good for you because you can concentrate, you can give all your concentration to the code only. All right. Okay, so that's it. So let's get started, and let's get started with Singleton Bean Scope. What do we mean by that? That's coming up next. Okay, so I do have a very simple project here called Spring Bean Scope, and I do have a src folder, and I do have a package created here called com.seleniumexpress.demo, right? So basically right now, let me go ahead and let me create a component here. And basically, as you guys know, that component means classes. So basically, let me create a new class, and let me say it as Singleton Demo. Cool, let me hit finish. Okay, so I do have a class here called Singleton Demo, right? All right, so right now tell me that how to convert this particular class as a Spring managed bean. So basically how to tell Spring that, hey, go ahead and create the object for this class and maintain it inside your application context container. So the way to achieve it is obviously I'm going to annotate this as a add component annotation. So right now Spring will create the object for this class called Singleton Demo, and it is going to manage this particular object inside its container. Okay. So basically to make it happen, the only thing I need to do here, I need to activate the component scanning by creating a Spring configuration file. So I'll go here and I'll create a new Spring Bean configuration file, and I'm going to name it as beans.xml. I'm going to hit finish. So right now, as you can see, I have a beans.xml file created by my IDE. I'll go to my namespaces because I want to activate the context namespaces, just because I want to activate the component scanning. So right now, let me do Command S. Let me go to the source mode of this so that I can see the source right now. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is that I'm going to activate the context annotation config so that I can use annotation inside my application. And the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to activate the context component scan, and I'm going to provide a bash package right here. So basically right now, all my classes, all my components are there inside the demo package. So let me go ahead and place the package name just right here, com.seleniumexpress.demo. Right? So right now the Spring will do what? During our application startup, Spring is going to look for all the classes right here inside this package called demo. So right now we have a Singleton demo class inside this particular package called demo, and it's marked with add component. So Spring will go ahead and create an object for this particular class. So right now, if I want to get this particular object from the container or from the application context, the way I can retrieve it by creating a client class. So let me go ahead and create a client class here, and let me say here app. Okay, so inside the app class right now, the first thing that I'm going to do here is I am going to use a main method because I want to run this app class. And the first thing that I'm going to do here is I am going to create a application context. So I'll say application context, application context equal to new class path XML application context. There we go. This is the one. And let me hit Command Shift O to remove any unnecessary imports that I have. And right here inside this class path XML application context, I need to provide my beans.xml. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me say beans.xml. So right now, basically, whenever I'm going to execute this particular statement, Spring is going to look for this particular XML file called beans.xml, and it is going to create an application context out of this particular file. And inside this particular application context, I have my object here. So I'll say context.getBean, and I want to get my object that I have created right here for this class called Singleton Demo. So right now, what is the name of this particular object? Obviously, if I'm not going to specify anything right here inside the component, the name is going to be Singleton Demo with the S small letter. And just to visualize this, I'm going to do what? I'm going to copy this name and I'm going to put this here inside this component argument so that this is right now the bean name for Singleton Demo. So right now, let me copy this name singleton demo. Let me go to app.java, and right now here inside the getBean method, I'm going to say that, hey container, could you please give me the object for singleton demo? And I'm going to say singleton demo.class. So I'll say I want the object for singleton demo.class. And there we go. It is going to give me the singleton demo class object. Let me copy this, and I'm going to say here singleton demo and singleton, let me say obj1, because I'm getting the singleton demo class object just right here. Okay, so now the question is, if I am going to move this a little here, the question is right now, if I am going to ask for the singleton demo object again to the container, what is going to happen? So basically right now, let me copy this line again, and let's say again I'm going to paste this line, and again I'm going to say context.getBean, hey application, give me the bean for the singleton demo. Then obviously the application again is going to give a different object to you. Let's say I am naming that with obj2. So right now I have two different objects for the singleton demo class. One is obj1 and this one is obj2. So now the question is, let's say if I'm going to print these two objects, let's say sysout, and I'm going to say obj1, and I'm going to print this one, and I'm going to give a space, and I'm going to print the obj2 again. Right now the question here is, as I'm printing both the obj1 and obj2, both this object will be retrieved from the container whenever we are asking for the getBean method, whether Spring is going to give us the same object, the same singleton demo object, or a different object right now. So basically it's pretty simple. The question is pretty straightforward, right? Whenever I'll ask my application context that, hey, please give me an object for singleton demo bean, then obviously it is going to return me an object, right? And again, if I'll ask for the same objects just right here in the line number 12, again I'm asking for the singleton demo bean, and again I'm storing it with a different reference called obj2, then whether Spring is basically giving me the same object for the singleton bean or a different object for the singleton bean. So let's prove this out. Let me do Command S. Let me do right click, run as, and Java application. And let's see here what is going to happen. I'm going to save everything. And where is my console? Right here. So as you can see right now, the references, the hash code representation, just right here you can see this particular value is exactly matched with this particular value. This particular value is exactly matching with this particular value, which is proving that both this obj1 and obj2 are same. So to prove that, what you can do, again you can write a if clause here, and you can say if obj1 equals obj2, if both these objects are same, you can print out a line that same object returned. Okay, and there you go. So right now what you can do, you can go ahead and can run this particular program again. So I can click here run, and you can see one more line is going to be get printed here called same object returned. So these two lines are pretty much enough to prove that whenever we basically ask to the container that, hey, give us a bean by using the getBean method, it basically give the same object again and again as many times we are going to ask for it by using the getBean method. So this is what we call a singleton scope. So whenever we are defining any bean, let's say by using a add component, the default scope for this particular bean is going to be singleton. So we do not need to specify it explicitly, but if you want, you can use a annotation here called scope, and you can specify it right here. So you can say scope is equal to singleton, right? So this particular line is not going to make any difference. That's because even if you do not write this particular line, the default scope for this particular bean is going to be singleton. So to prove this again, I'm going to remove this one. Let me do Command S, and let me go to my app.java, and right now again let me run this particular program. So I'll say run, and you can see there is no difference, and obviously we will be getting the same object right here. So you can see the obj1 is this one, the hash code for is this one, and the obj2 hash code is exactly same as obj1. So it is saying same object returned whenever we are basically trying to compare the obj1 and obj2 whenever we ask for it to the container. So the Singleton scope is pretty much straightforward, but before I wrap up this particular section, I'm going to tell you that, instead of hard coding Singleton right here, if you want to specify it, there is a better way to specify the scope of the bean as Singleton. That is, we can write value here, and we can say equal to, and we can say configurable bean factory. We can look for something called configurable bean factory dot, you can say scope prototype scope singleton. So basically I can choose scope singleton, and this is basically a standard way of saying that this particular bean does have a scope called singleton. And as I said, this is not much mandatory to write it. You may write it, you may not write it. That's because even though if you do not write this line, still the scope of this particular bean is going to be singleton, because that is the default scope for a Spring Bean. Alright, so right now let me introduce to you with a new bean scope called prototype. Okay, so basically how to use a prototype bean scope. So let me first of all close these classes. I do not need it right now, and also let me close the beans.xml file, and right now let me go ahead and let me create a new class called, let's say, prototype demo. Okay, and for this prototype demo class, how to make this class a component? First of all, I can use a add component annotation to mark it as a component, and obviously I can give a name to this particular bean. I can copy this and I can paste it right here, and I can say prototype demo. So even though if I'm not going to define this thing right here, basically the name for this particular bean is going to be prototype demo, whatever the class name, that is the bean name as well. But let me define it explicitly right here by marking it with a add component annotation and giving it a name called prototype demo. Cool. So right now the next thing here is, if I'm going to ask you that right now, what is the scope for this particular bean? And obviously the scope for this particular bean is going to be singleton. As I told you previously, if we do not define any scope for a class, basically the default scope will be singleton. So to make it a prototype, so what we can do here, we can write here add scope. We can write a add scope annotation, and we can just say it here that, hey, this is a prototype scoped bean. So I can write prototype here. Okay, and there you go. Right now the scope for this bean is became prototype. So what is the advantage that we will get if we mark a bean with prototype, or what is the behavior of this particular object will be if we mark this class as prototype, right? So let me explain this to you with a simple example. So first of all, I will go to my app.java again, and right now inside my app.java, after I load my application context right here, all these things I want to comment this for a moment. So let me comment all these things till the if clause, and there you go. Right now I have my application context, and I am loading it just right here. And once my application context started here, I'm going to ask for a bean here. I'll say, hey context, please give me the bean for prototype, my prototype demo class, right? So I will go to my prototype demo class and I will copy the name of this particular bean, which is prototype demo. I'll go to my app.java and I'm going to ask this particular container or this application context that, hey, please give me the bean for prototype demo class. And I can say it here, prototype demo dot class. And basically whatever the result it is going to give me, whatever the object it is going to give me, I'm going to handle the return type here. I'll say prototype demo obj1 is equal to this. Okay, so right now, as I told you, whenever we use the getBean method, and if we'll ask the container that, hey, please give me the bean, and if this bean is marked with a scope called prototype, then the container will give me the brand new object for this particular class every time I call for it. So for an example, if I'll go here to app.java, let's say if here I'm saying context.getBean of prototype demo, then the container will give me a new instance for this particular class called prototype demo. Let's say again, if I'll go and ask for another object, let's say context.getBean again, and again if I'm going to ask for the same prototype demo object, let's say prototype demo, and here again if I'm going to say it, hey, give me the prototype demo object, so prototype demo.class, and again if I'm going to store it with a prototype demo reference, so I'll say prototype demo obj2. Obviously this is a different object because I'm asking again to the container, hey, give me the prototype demo object. But here the difference will be every time I ask for an object, the container or my application context is going to return me a new instance. And the way to prove it, and basically I can go ahead and again I can write a sysout and I can print the obj1 and obj2. So I'll say obj1 plus, I can give a space here, and again I'll say obj2, and there you go. And again I can write a if clause here, if, and the condition is if obj1 equals obj2, then I can say sysout obj1 and obj2 are same. And if not, I can write another else here, and I can say again another sysout. I can write here and I can say obj1 and obj2 are not same. Okay, so obviously as my bean scope has been defined as prototype here for the prototype demo class, then obviously every time I call for the bean here called prototype demo, I will be getting a new instance. So obj1 and obj2 will be different. That's why I can see the hash code for obj1 and obj2 will be different. And obviously here the else clause will be executed. That's because these two are different instances. Okay, so let me go ahead and let me do command S and let me run this particular program and let's see what we are going to get here. And if you are going to see here, first of all, the hash code for this particular class is not same. You can see these are two different hash codes, is not same, and obviously the else clause got executed and obj1 and obj2 are not same. That means we are getting a different instance whenever we are marking this prototype demo class, whenever we are marking this particular bean just right here as a prototype scope. And obviously if I'm going to change this to singleton, then right now you can see every time I ask for this particular bean, as this particular bean scope is marked as singleton, I'm going to get same object right here. And obviously this particular clause will be executed and obj1 and obj2 will be same in this case. If I'm going to run this, you can see the same hash code, the same object is getting printed here. That's because the scope is singleton and the obj1 and obj2 are same. In case we are asking for the prototype demo class, that's because we have marked this class scope as singleton. So let me change it to prototype right now, but for now let me again use the value here, and I can say configurable bin factory dot scope prototype. So if I want to define the prototype scope, I can use configurable bin factory.scope prototype. This is another way to do it. And obviously this is the standard way to set the prototype scope instead of just writing prototype here inside the scope parenthesis manually. So hopefully it makes sense. When we define a class scope as prototype, every time we ask the instance for it to our container is going to give us a brand new instance. I hope that you guys get a kind of foundation on the prototype and the singleton scope of a bin. So right now let me go ahead and let me tell you some advanced stuff. And before that, let me create a new class. Let me ask you a very simple question before we go forward, and let me name this class as a student. So I want to mark this class student as a component. So let me say it's a component here. And after that, let me say that this student has a property here called name. So private string and name, and let me generate the getter and setter for this. So that basically I'm going to hit command 1 and I'm going to say create getter and setter, and I'm going to say okay for this, and there you go. I have a getter and setter present here. So right now the next thing that I'm going to do here, I will go to my app.java, and right now first of all let me delete everything that I have just right here, and let me only have the application context where I'm loading the beans.xml file. And right now from the context, let me ask for, let me say context.getBean, and let me ask for the bean called student. So I'll say student, and there's the bean, and I'll say student.class. So I'll say student.class, and there you go. It is going to get me the student class bean. So I'll say student1 is equal to this one. Okay, and right now first of all let me try to print the student1 reference. So let me say student1 command s, and let me execute the program just to check whether everything is working fine. So as you can see that I have I got the student class reference, so I'm able to fetch the bean called student. That means my add component is working fine, and obviously I do not have any name given to my component, so by default this particular class name is student, right? Just as the class name. So this is working fine. Right now let me do one work. Let me set the name for this student. Let's say student1 dot set name, and obviously I will give a new name to the student. Let me say Abhilash P to the student name. So right now once I set the student name, let me print it. So I'll say student1 dot get name. So obviously right now for this student object, whenever the student object will be initialized by the Spring container, the property it has called name, by default the value for the name will be null because the string default value is null. So right now I am fetching this particular object, the student object, just right here from the context, and then I'm setting a new name to this called Abhilash, and right now I'm printing the name here. So I'll do a command S right now, and if I'll run this particular app, you are going to see the student name, which is Abhilash P, whatever I set, right? So right now the question for you guys is, if I am going to again fetch the same student object, again from the context by using the getBean method, again if I'll say get me the student object, and I want the student object for the student dot class. If I'll ask my container again the student object, and if I'll store it with a new reference called student, and this time I'll say student2. And again, right now, if I'm going to, let's say, if I'm going to print it again, if I'm going to print the name again, student2.getName, from this instance, I want to get the name of it. So what is going to be the expected output for the line number 16? Just think about it for a minute. And obviously your answer is right. So first of all, you need to check what is the default scope for the student. So if I'll go to my student class, I have not used any scope annotation right here for the component student. So obviously the default scope for this will be singleton. So if the default scope will be singleton, as many times I'll be asking for the student bean, it is going to return me the same bean. So first of all, here in the line number 11, I am asking for the bean to my container. It is giving me the bean. I am setting some name to this particular object called student1. And obviously right now inside this student class property, this name property is right now set with the value called Avilash. Right? So now right here in the line number 15, whenever again I'm asking for the student object, the container is going to give me the same student object. And obviously to that student object, I have already set some default name into it, which is Abhilash P. So obviously if it is the same object, I will get the name right here. If I'll do a system.out.println student2.getName, obviously this student2 will be the same object returned by the container. So obviously I'll be getting the name here, whatever I set here. So obviously for this also, I will get a result called Avilash. I can write a log here, student2 name. Okay, so right now let me run this application again, and you are going to see that it is printing Avilash P for the student1, and for the student2 also the name is Avilash P. That's because I am getting the same object back from the container whenever I'm saying context.getBean, because this student default scope is singleton. Right now if I'll change it to prototype, if I'll say scope, and if I'll say the scope value is, let's say value, and I will say this value is prototype. So right now the scope for this student object is changed. So whenever I'll do a get bean, I will get a brand new student class instance, so that whenever I'm saying get bean right here, I will get a student1 instance. It is a different instance, and I'm setting the name here. So obviously whenever I'll be printing the name, I'll be getting Avilash. But right here, whenever again I'll be calling the get bean method, I'll be getting a different student object just right here. So whenever I'm trying to log the name by fetching the name from the student2 instance, obviously it is a new instance, so I'll get null for the name property. So let me say command S, and let me go ahead and run this application. You can see Avilash P for the first log that I have here. For this, the name is Avilash P. That is what I said just right here. But next time whenever I'm saying context.getBean again, I'll be getting a different instance, and for this instance obviously I have not set anything. That's why it is returning me null here. So I can give a space so that the output will look good. So I can see that if I'll change it to prototype, obviously every time I ask for the student object, I'm getting a new one. That's why the name is null, right? Okay, hopefully this makes sense right now. First of all, let me go to the student.java class, and right now let me do one thing. So what I want to do right now, first of all, I will go to demo class and let me create a new class right now. Let me say I want to create a new class called school. Okay, and now first of all, let me close everything inside the app.java. Also, let me remove all this thing because I want to write more code in front of you so that you guys will be understanding that what I'm trying to do here. So right now, let's start everything from scratch. So first of all, think like I have a school class, and inside this school right now, let's say I have a component annotation and I have a add scope annotation. So I'll say add scope, and right now imagine that I have a scope for this called Singleton, right? So I need to type it manually, Singleton. So for this school class, I have a scope called Singleton. Okay, and I have another class. Imagine that this class is student. Okay, and for this student class, the scope that I have here is prototype. Okay, so right now let me do one work. For this student class, let me create a default constructor. I'll say student control space, and I'll create a default constructor for this, and just I want to log something that student object created. Okay, and right now inside the school.java also I want to write a default constructor. So I'll say school and control space. I want to generate a default constructor here, and for this also I'm going to say school class object. Let's say school object created. Okay, there we go. So now tell me one thing. So for this school class, the scope is Singleton. Okay, and for this student class, the scope is prototype. Okay, so right now both this student class and the school class is marked with the add component annotation, correct? So right now if I'll go to my beans.xml, obviously I have a component scanning here which is scanning the demo package, which is basically this package, and inside this package both my school class, which is this one, annotated with add component, and also my student class, which is also annotated with a add component. The student class is also present here inside the demo package. So whenever I will start my Spring program, if I'll go to my app.java right now, whenever I'll write application context equal to new class path application context, and whenever I'll provide my application context file name, which is beans.xml. So obviously this beans.xml file does have a component scanning, so it will scan for this particular package and will instantiate all the classes with add component annotation, isn't it? So if I will go to app.java and if I will run this particular statement, then obviously my assumption is the school class object will be created and will be managed inside the Spring container. That's because it has a add component annotation, and also the student class object will be created by the Spring automatically because we have add component annotation before the student class as well. Right? So if the student class object will be created by Spring, then obviously this constructor will be get called, and I'll see student class object got created on my console. And similarly, if school class object will be created by Spring, it has a add component annotation. So obviously whenever the object will be created, this particular constructor will run and I'll see the school object created in the console. So let me go ahead and let me try this example. So first of all, let me execute this application context line here by loading the beans.xml file. So I'll go here and I will do run the app. And let's see what is going to happen. Look at the console right now, and you can see only the school object got created. So right now, this particular line is proving that only the school class constructor got called. Right now, the immediate question is that why not the student.java, this particular class constructor, why didn't got called? So right now only the school.java, only this particular constructor gets called. That's why I can see school object created. So why it is happening? And the answer for this question is pretty simple. Right now the school class does have a scope annotation called Singleton. But if you see in the student.java class, here I have the scope for this particular student being defined as prototype. So remember one thing, if you mark a bean as prototype, then whenever the container is going to start, whenever your application context is going to start, it will not instantiate any bean marked with the prototype scope, just like right here for the student. And that's why whenever the container is getting started, whenever my application context is getting started, it is only scanning those bean which has a singleton scope defined, just like school. This bean has a singleton scope, that's why the constructor got called, and obviously this particular object got created, and then this object started living inside the application context. So the immediate question will be, whenever this particular class is going to be invoked, or this particular class is going to be instantiated, or when the Spring is going to instantiate this student class if the scope is defined as prototype. The answer is pretty simple, guys. Whenever we call for the student class object, whenever we need a student class object, at that time Spring is going to initialize this particular class, or Spring is going to create the object for the student class. So to prove that, if we'll go to app.java, right here, if you're going to say context.getBean, and if you're going to say student and student.class, at that time you will see that the student class object will be created and this particular constructor will be called, because right now I'm asking for the student class object. So let me do what? Let me do Command S and let me do run this app. And as you can see right now, the student object got created and also the school object got created. So right now this proves that the object like student class, which has a bean scope as prototype, does not instantiate during the application start off. If a bean has a scope as prototype, will only be initialized when we ask for it, just like context.getBean. Or else, if I'll remove this, there is another scenario when the bean which is marked as prototype scope will be initialized. I'll tell you when. So right now, you can see from my app.java, there is no other statement. So if I will be running this particular application, only the school object will be created. You can see it just right here. So right now, if I'll go to my school.java, and here let's say inside my school.java, if I have a dependency, here called student, my school has a dependency here called student, I can mark it as a private variable, and also I can auto-var it. So right now what is going to happen? Whenever Spring is going to initialize the school object, it is going to see that, well, this school class has a dependency and this dependency is the student class. So right now it will go to student class. If I'll do control click, it will see that, okay, it has a prototype scope. So doesn't matter. Right now, this particular school class has a dependency for students. So right now, obviously to initialize this school class, first of all, this student class need to be initialized. That's why Spring is going to create the student class object right now. And once it's created the object, it will go to the school class and it is going to inject that student object just right here, just because we have a auto-var annotation just right here. So the student object will be auto-var to this particular dependency, and then the school class object will be created. So the school class object will be created with a student dependency in it, and Spring will do all this dependency injection for this automatically. That's because that's the feature of Spring DI. Okay, that's what we learned in our Spring Core course. So right now, if you can see, if I'll do Command S, if I'll go to my app.java, if I'll boot up my application context, if I'll do right click, run as Java application, you can see both my school and student object right now got created. So basically, whenever this particular context boot up, it will try to initialize the school class because it has a add component annotation. Right now it has a dependency for student. That's why it also initialized the student class, and obviously both the objects got created, and you can see the proof here because their respective constructor got called here. So right now let me ask you a question. So hopefully you have got everything so far. Right now listen to me very carefully. So you can see I have a class here called school, and I have a dependency here for the student, right? And let me basically generate the getter and setter for this. So let me hit command 1 and I'll say generate the getter and setter. Okay, so basically I have a getter and setter for student, my student reference here. But right now this school class scope is singleton and the student class scope is prototype. So basically if I will go back, so right now my singleton class school does have a dependency for student, but this dependency is a prototype dependency, isn't it? This student class right now marked with prototype. So now the question is, what will happen whenever I will go ahead and initialize this particular class? So basically I will not initialize this class. This class has a add component annotation. So Spring will go ahead, whenever it is going to do a component scanning, it is going to initialize this particular class, isn't it? So once Spring initialize the school class, as per the concept that we have learned so far, if I will go ahead and ask my application context, or if I'll ask the Spring container that, hey, give me the school class instance, then every time that I'll ask for the school class instance, the Spring container will only provide me a single object because the scope for the school is singleton. But let's say if I'm going to ask for the student class object using my school class instance, then obviously it should return me multiple student object. That's because this student class has a scope called prototype, isn't it? So right now my question is, whenever I will call get student, obviously this get student method is going to give me a student object. So this get student method is going to give me the student object, which is this one, and this object has been defined as prototype. So that means as many times I am going to call the get student method, I should get a different student object each time. That's because this class has been defined as prototype, isn't it? So let's go ahead and test this scenario, and it is a very important scenario, guys. You have a class which is singleton. It has a dependency which is prototype. The student one is prototype. Then what will happen if I will call the get student method right now? Will I get a different student object each time given by this get student method? Let's check it out. Okay, let's not be confused. Let's check it out and just give me all your concentration right now because this is a very important scenario. So first of all, let's go here, and from the context right now, I'll say context dot get bean, and right now let me get the school bean first. So school, and this will return me the school dot class. And let me handle the return type. Right now let me go ahead and copy this line again, and let me again say give me a school object again right here, and I will change the reference to school object 2. So right now let me try to print the school object 1 has code plus, I'll give a space, and also I want to print the school object 2 has code. Okay, and obviously if our concept is clear so far, then I will be getting the same hash code both for school object 1 and school object 2 because this school class is marked as singleton. Let me go back. Okay, so right now let me do a right click, run as Java application, and let me see the output. So you can see the school object got created, the student object got created, and I'm printing the hash code, and you can see the hexadecimal representation of the hash code, and both this hash code are same, isn't it? See this and check this one. So both this hash code are same. So basically the container is returning me the same instance, which is pretty perfect because the school class is singleton. So right now my question is, let me remove this. Let's say I got my school class objects just right here, and I'll say school object 1 dot get student, and this is going to get me a student object, isn't it? Let me print that object. Let me say sys out, and I will print my student object. Okay, and let's say again I will say school object 1 dot get student. Again I want to get a student object, and obviously again I'll try to print this line. So basically this will give me the student object hash code, isn't it? Let me do sys out. Okay, so now tell me what is going to happen. So right now if I'll say school object dot get student, if I'm going to click here inside this get student method, obviously this is going to return me the student class object, right? Right now this student class object, we have marked it as prototype. So it is going to give me a brand new instance of student object, isn't it? Cool. Then again, let me go to app.java. And again, I am saying school object 1.get student. Again, the same method will be get called. And again, a brand new instance of student will be returned to me because we have marked this particular class as prototype. That's what should be the behavior. This class is marked as prototype. So every time I'll call for this particular student object, it should return me a new student object, isn't it? So let me go to my app.java right now and let me test this out. So right now, let me do right click, run as Java application, and check the object reference that it is going to return to me. And as you can see, these are the student class object, which is confirming this one student at the rate. Look at the hash code and look at the hash code here. So this is confirming that the object that we are getting each time we are asking for the get student, the object which is returned by the get student object is same. That means the prototype scope is not actually working, isn't it? The student class prototype scope here is not actually working. If it would have working, then I should be getting different instances for the get student method. Whenever I'll be calling the get student method, I should be getting the different instances. But here it is not happening. And also you can see the constructor of the student object created. It is saying that the student object created only one time, isn't it? But here I am calling the get student object for 2 times. So 2 times student class constructor would have called, but it is not happening. That's why we are getting the same instance back. So right now, this is a very important interview question. That's why they will ask you that, well, you have a class here which is marked as singleton, and also you have a dependency which is marked as a prototype. So right now, let's say if somebody is trying to get the student by using the get student method, whether it should return the same instance or different instance. And as you can see right now, it is returning the same instance, which is violating our fundamental and which is violating our concept. So right now, how to solve this? Alright, so to solve this particular scenario, I'll go to school.java, and first of all, I'll try and understand what is happening here. And as you can see, Tell me one thing first of all, guys. Whenever Spring will going to initialize this particular class, obviously it is going to initialize it for only one time, isn't it? That's because whenever there will be a component scan happening, this particular school class will be detected because it has a component annotation on top of it. Then Spring will go ahead and initialize this particular class. And whenever Spring will initialize this particular class, it will also inject the dependency because we have also have a auto word annotation over this particular dependency. So Spring will go ahead and create the student class object and also inject the student class object just to this particular property dependency. So if I'll put it in simple term, Spring will create the object for the school class and also it will inject the dependency, and then that particular object school will be there inside my application context, isn't it? So right now, the instantiation of the school class will happen only one time, right? Because once the component scanning is done, this class object will be created and then maintained inside the application context. And also the dependency injection only happen one time. The time the school class object will be created, at that time the dependency injection will happen, and also the student reference is going to get a object of student, and that will happen only for one time. And that's why whenever you are going to ask for the school object 1, so what is happening? The school object 1 is basically belongs to the school class, right? So the get student method is getting called and it is giving you the student object back, and this student object has been initialized during the time of the component scanning and during the time of the dependency injection. Whenever my container started initially, at that time this particular guy got an object, and that is the object it is returning me right now whenever I call for this and whenever I call for this. And that's why you can see the same object just right here, the same reference just right here. So to make the bean scope worked, okay, I will go to my school class. Let's say my school class does have a dependency called student. Right now I need to make this school class full. I need to pull him. Okay, so how can I pull him? So to pull the school class, I need to give a proxy object to this student. So right now, in order to get different student object each time I call for this reference, I need to make this guy full. Okay, FOOL. How can I full this school class? So to make him full, what I'll do here, I'll go to my student class, and here whenever I'm defining the prototype scope, I also need to define a proxy. I need to define a AOP proxy. So might be it sounds confusing whenever you hear the proxy for the first time, but do not worry. Just understand the thing that I'm telling here. Do not think too much, and we will talk about it very briefly later. But right now, what I need to do here, I need to choose the proxy mode, and I need to use a proxy here, and I will say proxy mode is the target class. So scoped proxy mode, and I will provide the target class here, and that's it. That's how your student class is looking like right now. You need to define the prototype scope and also define the proxy mode here. Just define it as scoped proxy mode dot target class. Now what is going to happen if I'll have the proxy mode activated? So let me go to my school.java. Right now, whenever Spring is going to initialize this particular class, when my container is going to start, we have a dependency here for the student class. Right now, what we will do, as we have a proxy activated right here, as we have a AOP proxy right here, or as we have written proxy mode equal to target class, so this guy is going to get a proxy object. So previously we used to inject a original student object to this reference. So right now, instead we are going to inject a proxy object. So the proxy object, the name says, right, fake, proxy, fake. we can right now understand it just like this. Imagine that whenever you used to go classes, engineering classes during your school days, you used to say, right, proxy mardana mera, right? We used to do proxy for our friends, right? We used to say our friends, hey, go and for my attendance, please do a proxy for me. Okay, same like that. We used to fake it just right here. We need to make this guy full. Whenever this particular class is going to be instantiated, whenever the dependency injection will happen, right now as we have the scoped proxies just right here, which is say target class, so a student proxy object will be injected to this. Okay, so right now instead of the original student object, this particular guy will get a proxy object, and this school class also will not know about it, because right now whenever this particular guy is going to instantiate, it will say that, hey, give me the student object. So right now we will give it a proxy object. So this guy will not know that whether the student object that it is going to have just right here is a proxy object or a real object. This guy doesn't care for that. So it got the dependency injected. Right now the instantiation is successful, right? So right now what will happen, whenever, if I'll go to my app.java, right now whenever I will ask for the get student, so the get student method will be called, and right now it need a student object. Now the proxy object will go and will actually get a real student object, and it will give you that particular object right now. This particular get student object right now will give you a original student object. So how this will happen? The proxy object will go and fetch a original student object and will give that to you. So right now you can see what, if I'll save this particular class, if I'll go to app.java, if I'll do right click, run as Java application, you can see some magic here. So look at the console, and there you go. So you can see right now for the first sys out here, right, you are getting a new student object. And again, next time whenever the get student method got called, again the student object got created, and again you are getting a new class instance right here. The hash code here is proving that these two objects are different, and all this happenings by using the AOP proxy, because right now this particular guy is holding a proxy object, and each time we are having a method invocation, the proxy student object is right here going and getting the original student object, and then it is delegating the method call, so that right here we are getting the original student object back right now. So that is what it is proving. Alright, so right now that is the concept behind the scene. So if you understand this much, that's pretty much enough. But right now you might have a question that, well, Abhilash, we are not doing anything right here. How Spring is giving this particular guy a proxy object? How it is happening behind the scene? So basically, whenever we are writing here proxy mode scoped proxy dot target class, this particular line is doing the magic. And this line is doing what? It is automatically generating some code. It is automatically generating a proxy class for the student. It is automatically generating the proxy object for the student. And the way it is doing it, that is by using a library called CGLIB, right? We call this Spring CGLIB. CG stands for code generation library. So Spring does have a code generation library, and the code generation library does what? It is automatically manipulate class. It is automatically create some proxy classes for you. So on the fly, it will create some proxy classes. It will generate some proxy classes. Imagine that your application is running right now. If I'll run my app.java, your application is running, but during the time your application is running, the Spring code generation library give us a feature that it can go ahead. It will create a proxy class for student. It can generate a proxy object for student, and it can also give that proxy object to this particular instance. So all these things happening by the Spring code generation library. So to you should not believe me, to prove that, what I need to do, I can put a breakpoint here, and I can put a breakpoint here in the line number 19. I can go here to app.java, and whenever I'll call the get student method, I can put a breakpoint here. So my code flow will stop just right here, and I can see that the student object that I'll be getting, this is basically not a normal object, it is a proxy object, and it is generated by the CGLIB or the Spring Code Generation Library on the fly automatically. So to prove that, what I'll do, I'll go to my app.java, and right now I'll debug my application, and let me show you that particular object. It is different than the original object. If I'll do yes right now, I will go to the line number 13. So right now let me execute this line, and let me go to the getStudent method. So I'll go here and I'll resume this particular program. Right now you can see this student object. You can see this student object right now. This student is a object. It is holding an object. The student reference is holding an object called student $, which stands for the inner class, and you can see enhancer by the Spring CGLIB. And if I'll go here, you can view it better. If you'll see the student class object right now, check the object this particular student reference is holding. This student reference, you can see it is holding the reference. If I'll expand this, you can see it is holding a proxy object, right? You can see the proxy right here. So basically this particular object, we should not be worried what it is holding, but just want to make sure that, just want to let you guys know that this guy is right now holding a proxy object generated by the Spring Code Generation Library or Spring CGLIB, right? By the help of the CGLIB, the proxy stuff is working right here on my program. So let me resume it, and I will show you one more thing. Let me resume it. Let me terminate this particular program. So what if I'll go to the normal perspectives right now. So I'll show you one more thing. Right now, let me go to the student.java. Let me remove the proxy from here. Right now, obviously the stuffs will not work for us. So if I'll go to my app.java right now, again, right now, this will give me the same instance, but again, I want to show you in debug mode right now what kind of object the student reference is holding. So right now, let me debug it. Let me go to the other perceptives, and right here, where is my code right now? Where is my flow? My flow is here, right? Get student. I want to go into this get student. So let me resume this particular program so that it will go to the next breakpoint. And right now, let's see the student object, right? If I put my cursor right now, let me put my cursor right now here, and there you go. This is a normal student object, and name is set to null. Obviously, I have not initialized this student object with any sort of name, so the name is null. So right now, this student is this one, obviously. So right now, this student object is a normal student object. If I'll open up this, if I'll see the student, this is a pretty normal, pretty sweet student object. It's not a proxy object just right now, and that's why if it is not a proxy object, the student object is getting returned to us directly. This particular student object is getting returned to us directly. You can see the object hashcode. If I'll resume this particular program, if I'll resume this particular program, you can see the same object got returned to us, and obviously one number of student object got created, what we do not want when we define a student as a prototype scope. So basically we need to write here what, comma, proxy mode, and the proxy mode is equal to target class, and this is because the proxy will be automatically taken care by the Spring Code Generation Library or CGLIB. Okay, automatically it will create some classes. Automatically the Spring CGLIB will create some classes on the runtime, and during your Java program is running, the Spring CGLIB has the ability to create some classes on the fly, create some proxy classes on the fly, and can make those classes use during your application is running. And that's how the Spring is providing a beautiful feature and powerful feature right now, so that right now the school.java, the student reference, can hold a proxy object, a proxy student object for us. Hopefully I'm able to make you understand this one. I do not know I bored you guys, or I'm able to make you understand this particular concept, but hopefully you understood something, and I am satisfied right now. Alright, so right now our goal is fulfilled, and my student dependency right here, which is a prototype dependency, is supposed to give me a new object of the student class is time. And the way I have achieved it right now by using the scoped proxy. So right now if I'll go to my app.java, and if I'm going to run this particular program, obviously the getStudent method will be returning me a new object is time. And you can see a new object is time, and obviously the student object got created for 2 times. That's because I have 2 times a getStudent method just right here. Okay, so right now I'll just tell you a new thing. Okay, basically I'll try to achieve the same scenario again with a different concept, and you will see this concept a lot whenever you are working in a real-time project. So right now, let's say if I'll go to my student.java, and if I'll remove this proxy mode, let me show you another way around. So right now, obviously this particular guy is going to give me one object right now all the time. So if I'll go to my app.java, and if I'll do right click, run as Java application, obviously, I'll be getting, the same instance every time I call the getStudent right now. So to make it work, to make the prototype scope available just right here inside this dependency, there is another way I can achieve it by using a method injection. I'll tell you what do you mean by that. So right now, what I can do, so basically I will come after this constructor. Let me maximize this particular class right now because I want to do some code. And right now, let's say I want this particular object, right, the student class object, every time I call the getStudent method. So right now, instead of returning this student object directly, what I can do, I will tell my Spring CGLIB or the code generation library to help me right here. And the way I'm going to do it, let's say I want the student object is time, the getStudent method gets called. So first of all, I need to create a method. Let's say method name is create student. Method name could be anything. Let me say create student. I can say create student object. Doesn't matter what is the method name. And what you need to do, let's say this create student method should return a student object. So I'll say student just right here. Okay. And this particular method should obviously return a student object, right? But I will not do it. I'll say return null. Let me say return null. Okay. I will not give any implementation to this method. This is none of my job. Only the thing I need to do right now, I need to write at lookup just right here. I just need to write this annotation. Okay. So now what I need to do. So right now I'm expecting that whenever I will call the create student object method, it is going to return me a new object. New object of what? New object of student class, right? Now the immediate question, hey Vilas, you are returning null. So how you are expecting that this particular method is going to return you a student object? Well, we will see. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do, create student object. So what I'll do here, this getStudent object I'm calling, right? So instead of returning this student object, this one, instead of returning this, what I'll do here, I will return this particular student object, right? So I will copy this method name and I will call it just right here. And there's it. There you go. You do not need to do anything, right? So basically, I can also simplify this. Let me copy this. Let me put it just right here. This particular method is going to return me a student object. So I'll say student obj, or I can say student is equal to, and I can return this student object. Copy this, paste this variable, and there you go. That is my getStudent method right now. So now you will see that whenever I will call the getStudent method, just right here, go to the app.java. Whenever I'll call the getStudent method, obviously inside the getStudent method, I'm calling another method, which is create student object. If I'll go to that method, right now, this particular method is annotated with a annotation called @lookup, and it is returning me nothing. Why it is returning me nothing? Because I want Spring to give the implementation for this object. The Spring CGLIB or the Spring code generator library is going to take care of the rest. It is going to override this particular method on the runtime and it is going to give me the implementation for this return. It is basically return me a student object each time, and that's whenever I'll call the getStudent method, this create student object is going to return a new object. That's why I'll be getting a new object just right here, because whatever this particular method is returning, I'm returning it just right here. Let me test this out and then I will explain more about it. Let me go to app.java right now, and here I'm calling the getStudent method 2 times. So let me do what? Right click, run as Java application. And now you can see that I do have 2 different student objects returned by the getStudent method, isn't it? The first student hasScore is different and the second student hasScore is different. So I am calling getStudent 1 time and 1 time, 2 times, right? So I can see right here, student object got created 1 time and 2 times right here, right? And also you can see there is another student object got created, right? So 3 times the student object got created. Why? 1, 2 and 3. This 2 is just because I am calling the getStudent method twice just right here, and another time whenever the first time the school.java, this particular class got initialized by the Spring container, the student object will be injected to it, and that time the object got created for the student class. And that's why you can see 3 times it is here, student object created, first during the time of the initialization, and then I'm accessing the getStudent method twice just right here in the app.java, and that's why you can see it is just right here and here. Cool. So right now the things worked and we are able to get 2 different student objects right now by the help of the create student object method. And the only thing that we did right now, we marked this particular method with @lookup annotation. So as I said, what happens internally is whenever Spring is going to check that, well, there is a method here with @lookup annotation, it is going to override this particular method on the runtime by the help of CGLIB that will create a subclass of school on the runtime, and it is going to override this particular method and it is going to return the student object back. So behind the scene, what happens here, let me show you. Behind the scene, what will happen, let me copy this method. Spring will create a new method for you. Let's say Spring will create a method just like this, create student object, and instead of null, Spring is going to give the implementation. It'll say context dot get bean, and it will do what? It will give you the bean for student dot class. Why it is going to give you the bean for student dot class? Because this is what it's returning, right? So behind the scene, this is the code the Spring is going to generate. So on the fly, the Spring code generation library is going to do what? It is going to create a subclass of school. It is going to override this particular method, and it is going to give an implementation just like this. And that's why you are going to get a student object back each time, because Spring internally is calling the getBean method and it is giving you the student class object back. Or you can understand better just like this, because I'm following the pattern. So it will say the student.class. It is going to return a student object, and that is the object this particular method is going to return me. And that's why whenever we are saying null here, still we are going to get the student object back. So basically, you can believe me if I'll do one more thing. If I will make this method abstract. So I told you, right, this particular method will be overridden by Spring dynamically. So what I'll do, I will not give it a body. I will say this particular method abstract. Okay, let me make this particular method abstract. Well, I need to move this abstract to here. This will be an abstract method. And imagine that this is the abstract method. It is giving me an error because my class is not abstract, because this class has an abstract method. So let me make this class also as abstract. Right now, all the error will go away. So right now, if I'll go to my app.java, and if I will run as Java application, you can see the exact same result right here. You can see I am getting two different student objects just right here, and the student object got created for 3 times. So how does this magic happen? So right now you can see inside the school.java, if you see my get student method, it is basically calling the create student object method. Right now this particular method is an abstract method. So who is giving the implementation for this, and who is basically returning you the student object? That's the Spring code generation library, and all this magic is happening just because we have a @lookup annotation. So Spring is going to magically generate a subclass for this school class, and then it is going to override this particular method. It is going to give this particular method an implementation, and it is going to return the student object. Okay, so that's how I can prove that, right? You can see the result on your console right now. So everything is working fine. The prototype scope is working fine, and all that I achieved by using the @lookup method. And right now also you know how the @lookup method works in a real time, and it's pretty simple. Whenever somebody asked about @lookup method, tell them that okay, this particular method will be overridden on the runtime by Spring, and Spring only is going to give the implementation for this particular method, and it is going to return you the student object. And that's why you are getting a student object just right here each time. Okay, so now let me revert everything back. Let me revert to the normal class. Let me remove this. Let me do let me do Command G. I do not need this lookup method and all. Okay, so now I have reverted back my code. You can see it is pretty simple. I have just have a get student method right here. It is returning the student object directly, whatever this dependency it has. And right now I do not want to use @lookup method. I just want to tell you about it because they are going to ask you this question on the interview. And right here, for now, I'm going to activate the proxy mode, and I'll say proxy mode is equal to target, a target class, and this is basically going to use the Spring CGLIB behind the scene. And there we go. That's what I need to say in this section. Alright, so before I wrap up this particular section, I want to ask you one question. And this is the question been asked many times in the interviews. So give me all your attention right now. And the question is pretty simple. Let's say you have a class, right? If I have a class here, let me say the class name is scope test. Okay. And let's say this class right now does have a singleton. If I'll mark this particular class right now with that component annotation, this class does have a scope called singleton, or obviously the default scope for the bean is singleton. Now tell me, what is the difference when I said this class has a scope called singleton between the GOF singleton design pattern? You know, right? We have gang of 4 design pattern, your normal singleton design pattern. I know you should be very familiar with the singleton design pattern. If you are not, then go ahead and learn how to create a class which is singleton in nature. So if you know, let's say if you understand that what is a singleton design pattern, normally if you make a class singleton, then that particular class always should return one instance, right? And obviously if we'll compare that particular concept to to this particular class, if we'll apply that particular concept right here on this scope test class, it seems pretty similar, isn't it? So right now let's say we have a class here. by default the scope will be singleton for the scope test class. So every time we ask the container that, hey, give me the scope test object, it will give me the same object. So it is similar to the GOF singleton design pattern concept, isn't it? But hold on, this is not true. The singleton in Spring is actually different than the singleton that you learned during your design pattern course. The GOF design pattern or the Gang of Four design pattern also give you the concept for the singleton. And that singleton says that if you create a singleton class any point of time when your application runs inside your JDK, that particular class always should return a single instance, right? But that is not true when it comes to Spring. Now let's say if I'm creating a Spring application, I have a component here called scope test, and right now by default the scope will be singleton, but that is per application context. Okay, let me simplify this a little. I know this may be confusing. So what I can do, let's say I have one beans.xml right here, right? So now let me copy this file. Let me go to src, let me do command V, and let me create a new file. Let's say beans2.xml. Right now inside the beans2.xml, I have the same lines of code right here, and I do not want to change it. It's basically going to scan the best package com.seleniumexpress.demo. So I'll go to my app.java, and right here, right now, I'll remove everything. Okay, and right here, I am loading my beans.xml file, and let's say from my beans.xml file context.getBean, I want to get the bean for my scope test class. Let me handle the return type, and let me ask the container for the scope test bean again. So let me copy paste this line. Okay, so right now this object and this object is going to be same because the scope test class does have a scope which is singleton. So basically I can mark this. I can write scope is equal to singleton. Alright, so right now the scope for this class will be singleton. So obviously I'll be getting the same object just right here. But now imagine that if I have another application context in my application. Okay, let's say whenever I'm creating this particular application called Spring Bean Scope, let's say I have another beans.xml file. Okay, basically we create our application context out of this particular file called beans.xml or beans2.xml. So let me copy this line again. And now let me say command V, and this time let me load the beans2.xml. Okay, and let me say application context, app context 2, and let me say this app context 1, app context 1, copy this, paste it here so that it will be better readable. Okay, so right now we have an app context 2. Now from this application context, again this application context is again going to be scanning the beans2.xml. So inside the beans2.xml, again it is going to scan the demo package. Inside our demo package, obviously the scope test is present and it has a scope of singleton. So right now the question is, if I'm going to do get win right here using the app context 2 reference, so if I'll say app context 2.getWin, and right here if I'll say give me the scope test object, then whether the object that it is going to return me, the scope test object that it is going to return me, let me say scope test 3, whether this object is going to be same as these objects, right? These objects I'm retrieving from app context 1, isn't it? And this scope test object I'm returning from app context 2. So I have created two different application contexts, and right now whether the object I'll be getting from the app context 2, the scope test object that I'll be getting here in the app context 2, whether it is going to be same here in the app context 1 object, right? Inside the app context 1 also I'm saying give me the scope test object, and I'm storing it with a reference. So right now, if I'm going to print it, let me print it, sys out, let me say here scope test 1 plus let me give a space here, and again let me say scope test 2. Okay, and here let me print sys out scope test 3. Okay, now you can see that from this application context, okay, this scope test class, it is singleton, so this application context will give me a object. The object that I'll be getting right here and right here is going to be exactly same, because the bean scope test is singleton, and that is only be valid for a single application context. But whenever right here I'm fetching the bean from a different app context, right here app context 2, again from this app context 2 I'm fetching the scope test bean, the instance that I'll be getting here is going to be different. So the singleton scope in Spring only works inside a single application context, but right here whenever we'll be creating a different app context, I'll be getting a different object right here. So let me prove that. Let me talk less and let me do Java application so that it will be more clear. Let me run this application, right? So you can see a school object created. That's because we have a school class, and inside the school class we have a constructor. So when the component scanning happened, the school object got created. And also you can mark that the school object got created for 2 times, because we have 2 application contexts, and 2 times the beans.xml and beans2.xml is getting loaded, and all these 2 application contexts is actually doing the component scanning. So school object got created. So basically, first of all, let me go to the school.java and let me write here, comment the constructor. So my intention is not to show you the school stuff right now. That is over. Right now, let me do right click, run as Java application. I do not want that school object created to get printed right here, and you can see the first system.out.println that we have is printing the scope test 1 and scope test 2, which is basically fetching from the application context 1, and you can see the object are same. But right here, this particular scope test object we are fetching from a different application context, as you can see right here. That's why it is a different object created by Spring. So what we understand from this example is that the scope test object is limited to one particular application context. For this scope test class, we have marked it as a singleton scope, and this singleton does mean that for one application context, the scope test will have only one instance inside the application context container. But whenever we are dealing with a different application context, again Spring will go ahead and again Spring will create a new scope test object. And inside that application context, if we'll call for the same scope test object again, if I'll do command V, let me say 4, these 2 will be same, because these 2 are from the same app context. So let me prove that. Let me say plus, let me give a space, let me say plus, and let me say scope test 4. So you can see the 3 and 4 are going to be same, and 1 and 2 are going to be it will be a different object. So if I'll go ahead and run as and Java application, 1 and 2 will be same, and 3 and 4 will be same. You can see this particular hash code and this particular hash code are same, and this particular hash code and this particular hash code is different because this is from a different application context. So whenever somebody is going to ask you in the interview that what is the difference between the Spring singleton concept and the GOF singleton concept, you can simply say that if we create a singleton class by following the GOF design pattern, then there will be one object inside the entire JVM. When your application will run inside the JVM, there will be only one instance for that particular class. But when you talk in Spring, when you mark a class with a singleton scope, there will be one single object for that class per application context. So if you'll have 5 application contexts, you will have 5 different objects, right? That's it. So that's it. We have spoke pretty much about the singleton prototype. Let me talk about some other scopes as well, because this tutorial is getting really long, but I feel that you guys are going to answer your interview question in a pretty comfortable way if you're going to follow this. So right now, before I wrap up this particular section and before I'm going to move to the next scope, I'm going to ask you a simple question. If I'll go to scope test right now, let's say right now the scope is here as singleton. If I'm going to change this scope to something else, let's say we understand about singleton, we understand about prototype. Let me say the scope is request. So I told you, right? We can also define the bean scope as request. So if I'll do that, if I'll say the scope of this scope test class is going to be request, and if I'll come to the app.java, and right now let me only load the beans.xml file, the app context one. If I'll create my application context by loading the beans.xml file, let's see what is going to happen. If I'll do a Java application, you can see that there is going to be an exception right here on your screen. Well, not yet, no problem. So let me try to access that particular bean. Let me say app context one dot get bean, and let me say, hey, give me the bean for scope test, which is marked as at scope request. So I want to get that bean scope test dot class. Okay, so right now if I'll try to get my scope test bean, which is marked as request, so right now I'm expecting that if I'll go to my app.java and if I'm going to run this particular program, I should get an exception. Should I? Yup. You can see no scope registered for request. You can see that you are getting a illegal state exception. The reason why you're getting this illegal state exception is the scope test is marked as a scope as request, and this request scope can be only used inside a web application. Right now we are dealing with a standalone application. It is a standalone project. It is a simple Java project. It is not a web project, and that's why there will be no request coming to our application right now. But we are saying that, hey, go ahead and initialize this particular bean whenever there is a request coming to your application, which is wrong. It's not a web application. And that's why it is saying illegal state exception, which proves that the request can only be used inside a web application. So right now, let me quickly create a web application and let me tell you the scope. The web application, our scopes, just like request, we have also session, we have also application. We also have a scope as application. Let me tell you about those scopes, and all these scopes like application, session, request, all these scopes are going to be only working inside a web application. If I'll run this one, again you are going to get an exception right here because I have defined the scope as session. So it is saying no scope registered for the scope name as session, right? So right now let me go ahead and let me create a new web project so that I can tell you about the session, request, and the application scope of a bean. Let's get started. Alright, so now let's talk about the request scope. So as I have told you, the request scope is only going to be work inside an web environment. Okay, so the scope like request, session, WebSocket or application is only going to be work inside an web environment or inside a Spring MVC project or inside a Spring Boot web project. So I have just created a very simple project here called Spring Bean Scope Web. Basically, this is a web project, and to save some time, I have created a project structure and I have created few files here that I'm going to give you a walkthrough right now. And trust me, if you already understood how Spring MVC works, if you have a little bit of idea of Spring web projects, then this project is going to be very, very simple to understand. Alright, so basically I have a source folder here and I have created a couple of packages. One is called API, where I'll be keeping my POJOs or DTO right inside this particular package called API. And obviously, as the name says, the controllers package, here I'll be storing my controllers. Alright, just like that. You can see I have a test controller here, and if I'll go to my API package, you can see I have a DTO or I have a POJO here called mybean. Alright, so now let me open up this mybean and let's see what I have it right here. Cool, so I have a simple POJO here called mybean. Inside this mybean, if I'll maximize this, alright. So now if you see here, this mybean is basically a very simple POJO or a DTO. Alright, I have a field here called website name, which is going to store my website name obviously, and I do have a couple of getter and setter for this website name, just because this getter and setter will help me to get the website name or to set a website name for my website. Alright, so this DTO called mybean is basically stands for that. Okay, just having one field called website name. Alright, so I can basically hardcore this website name to something. Initially, let's say if I'll be printing my website name, obviously it will be null because the string default value is null. Let me set a default website name called Selenium Express to this. Alright, cool. So now I have this DTO or I have this POJO, and let me go to my controller class right now and see, let's see what I have it here. So inside my test controller, obviously I don't have nothing. I've just created a class here called test controller, and I have annotated this particular class as add controller just because I want to tell Spring MVC that, hey, this is a controller class. Alright, so what else I have? Okay, I have a simple controller here as I have said you, and I have a simple bean I have created already called mybean. Alright, and what else I have? If I'll go to my web content here, basically I did set up my dispatcher servlet, and if you are already familiar with Spring MVC, you should be knowing what is a dispatcher servlet and how to configure it. And if you really don't know about it, I do have a course here on Spring MVC. You can go there and you can see how to set up dispatcher servlet using XML. And also if you want to set up the dispatcher servlet using the Java code, you can also see a video on this on my channel as well. Alright, so I have a dispatcher servlet set up here. I have a servlet name and a servlet class. You can see the servlet name I have given to this dispatcher servlet is dispatcher. And for this dispatcher, which is basically refers to my dispatcher servlet, this guy is going to handle all the requests coming to my website starting from /. Alright, and as you know, to initialize a dispatcher servlet, we obviously need a configuration file. So this is my dispatcher servlet configuration file, because to initialize the dispatcher servlet, we need to provide it a configuration file. That's what you can see here. Whenever I am initializing my dispatcher servlet by writing it inside a servlet and servlet tag, this is my dispatcher servlet, and for this dispatcher servlet, I am giving a configuration file called my web app dispatcher servlet.xml. If I will close this, and if I'll go to this particular file called my web app dispatcher servlet.xml, this is basically my configuration file where my dispatcher servlet is going to read all the information for my web app. So here basically I'm not doing anything, I'm just activating the component scanning. As you can see, context component scan, and obviously my best package name here is com.selenium express. So any packages that I have inside my src, if it is starting from com.selenium express, as you can see com.selenium express, then it will be eligible for component scanning. So I have couple of packages here starting from com.selenium express, as you can see the API package and the controller package, because I want both this package should be scanned by Spring, and if any of the packages containing any of the classes annotated with add component or add controller, then that particular class should be initialized by Spring. Okay, that's what component scanning means, and I hope that you understand what basically a component scanning does. Right, so now let me close all these things, so I really don't need to care for this. So well, let me come from the scratch again. So let me collapse everything. I have a SRC folder, I have a controllers class. Let me go to that. So inside my controller class right now, I want to give you a simple requirement. And the requirement here is, if I'll go to this API package, if I go to this my bean, I have a website name variable here, or a property here, initialized with Selenium Express. So basically, I want to write a kind of handler method here, which can basically print the website name to my console, and as well as to my website viewer, it can print that particular website name, which is Selenium Express. So basically, I can write a handler method right here. Let's say public. For now, let me write void, and let me say test. All right. So basically, I want to display the website name to my viewers, or to my website viewers. Okay, to my website viewers. Okay, all right, so this is my goal here. I want to display the website name to my viewers. So obviously, first of all, I need to have a mapping for this particular test, because this is right now a normal method, and I want to convert this method to a handler method by writing a request mapping here. So I'll say request mapping, and I'll give a mapping to this. For now, let me have /tasting as a mapping. So whenever somebody is going to hit /tasting, this is the method which is going to be executed. All right, so as I said, whenever somebody is going to hit this URL called /tasting, I want this particular method to get executed, and obviously inside this particular method, I'm going to write something. I want to write some code to print or to display my website name. So my website name is Selenium Express, and obviously the property name is website name. So the good thing that I can do here is I can basically create the object for this particular class called mybean, and I can call the respective getter method or setter method to get the website name, or to set the website name, I mean to set or update the website name. All right, so basically I'll go to my test controller right now. I'll be creating the object of mybean is equal to new mybean, and I can say here sysout, just logging something just right here. Let's say mybean dot get website name. All right, and obviously right now the website name that I'll be getting here, the get website name, if I'll click here, it will give me the website name, and obviously this website name is initialized to Selenium Express. So obviously I'll be getting Selenium Express just right here in my test controller, isn't it? But well, I don't want to do it in this way. I don't want to create object while using Spring. So basically, I don't want to create the object by myself by writing new mybean. Rather, I am going to tell Spring that, hey, create that mybean object and auto-ware it with this one. Okay, with this variable, you just create the mybean object and auto-ware it to this. But hold on, right now again we are going to have a problem, because in this mybean we have not written add component here. Okay, so first of all, we need to tell Spring that, hey, go ahead and create the object of mybean. So only that will happen whenever we'll have the add component annotation over this class. So right now when we write component here, during the time of component scanning, Spring will create the object of mybean and it will put it inside the container. And obviously right here for this dependency called mybean, that particular object which is get stored inside the IOC will be injected to the mybean reference here. All right, so right now I can take this mybean to here and I can do get website name, and I really don't need to create the new object of mybean by hard coding it to mybean equal to new mybean. I don't need to do that. I'm just telling Spring to auto-ware it. Simple auto-waring concept. All right, so before proceed further, just let me know one more thing. Can I do mybean dot set website name, and if I will set it to something Selenium Express updated. Alright, so if I want to write this, what is going to happen? Obviously, for this line, I'll be getting Selenium Express as a result. For the output of the line number 18 will be Selenium Express, isn't it? And right here in the line number 19, I'm basically changing my website name to Selenium Express updated, isn't it? So now, obviously, by the setter method, this setter method is going to set the website name to Selenium Express updated. Okay, but hold on. I want to right now give it a scope for this particular class, my bean class. For this particular class, I want to define a scope here right now. So for this bean or for this DTO, I want to define a scope here called request. So what it really means when we say add scope equal to request. So this does mean that for each request, we are going to create a new mybean object. So that basically means that for each request coming to our website, every request comes to our website. With each request, there will be a new mybean object will be created. For an example, right here, whenever I'll be saying /tasting, obviously this is a new request. That request will come to my website. Obviously somebody, if you'll tag this URL pattern and if it's going to hit this URL, my web application is going to handle this request, and obviously this is a new request coming to my website. So with this request, there is a new mybean object will be created. Okay, let's say somebody again hitting /tasting, again is a new request, and again a new mybean object will be created. Why a new mybean object will be created? That's because we have written a scope here, and that scope is request. So with each new request, as we have mentioned the scope as request, a new mybean object will be created. All right, so now let's go with our requirement. And let's try to execute this particular program and this particular handler method by implementing the requirement that I have given you. Okay, so right now, let me basically print the old website name and the updated website name to my web page. So basically, I'm not going to return any web page. Let me say it is a void method. So what I can basically do, I can write a HTTP servlet response, and I'll create a response object, and using this response object, let me print something to my response. So basically, instead of saying system.out.println, I can say, let me remove this one, let me basically cut it. I can say response.getWriter.write. I can say old website name, and I can concatenate this one with this mybean.getWebsite name. This is basically going to get you the website name first. Okay, and after this I can concatenate a br, okay, just to have a line break. So this is basically going to print your real website name, whatever you have initialized right here called Selenium Express. This is going to be printed in the web page. Okay, and after that, I'm basically updating my website name by using the setter method. Let's say Selenium Express updated, and after that, again I want to print. Let me copy this line, let me do Command V, and let's say I will say here updated website name, and this is going to be mybean.getWebsite name. So basically right now I have changed the website name, and actually I'm printing that right here. So right now let me go ahead and test this application. First of all, let me fix this error. It is saying to throw the exception to the header, so I'll do that. So right now my intention here is whenever there will be a testing request coming to my server, at that time a new object will be created for this mybean, right? For this mybean, a new object will be created. That's because the scope here is request. And to prove that, basically I can create a constructor here. Let me say public mybean, and let me create a constructor. Let me say sysout, and let me say mybean let me say my bean object created. Okay, so right now whenever a request will come here first time, a my bean object will be created, and then I'll be able to get my website name. First of all, what will be the default website name? I'll be getting that right here. Then I'm updating my website name, and then I'm printing it again. So let me do Command S. Let me run this particular application. I'll do right click, run as, run on web server. Next, and I'll do finish it. Let my application get started. So as soon as I run this application, you can see I'm getting a unsatisfied dependency action error creating the bean for the test controller because of the unsatisfied dependency expressed to the field called my bean. So basically what it is saying that for the test controller, if I'll go to my test controller, for this controller, whenever it is trying to initialize this, so we have a add controller annotation here, right? So basically whenever my component scanning will happen during the time of my application startup, it is not able to initialize the test controller. Why? Because there is an unsatisfied dependency exception. This my bean object, it is not able to auto where. Why? Because this my bean object, it is not able to create. So what is the problem? We already have a add component annotation right here. So Spring should have created the my bean object, and then it should have created the test controller object by injecting the my bean object right here. The Spring should create the object for test controller, and also it should inject the dependency for it. Then what is the problem? And the problem is pretty simple. So if we'll go to mybean.java, so here what we are saying that, hey, whenever there is a new request coming to our application server, or whenever there is a new request coming in, at that time only initialize this particular bean. But right here, whenever the application is just getting started, and whenever it is trying to initialize the test controller right here, at that time it is not able to inject the dependency for the test controller, which is my bean, because there is no new request is coming right now. So this particular object Spring is not creating. And right now we will apply the same rule. Okay, no problem. Right now we are going to make this particular controller full. How to make it full? To make it full, we need to assign a proxy object to my bean. So to assign the proxy object to my bean, again I'll go to my mybean.java, and right here I will define the proxy mode. So before that, let me say it value equal to request, and again I'll say proxy mode equal to target class. So I'll go for target class, and there it goes, scoped proxy.target class. So right now, whenever Spring is going to initialize the test controller during the boot up, it is going to inject a proxy object to my bean, and whenever there is a actual request coming into my application, this my bean proxy object then will go and fetch a real my bean object from the container, right? So let me test this right now again. Let me stop my server, and let me close this particular page, and let me start my application again. Let me say run as, run on server, and let me say next, and let me say finish. And this time I'm 110% sure that my server is going to be get started and my controller will be initialized. And let's check it out. You can see my server has already been started in this much millisecond, so no problem. Let me go ahead and hit my request. So my request is /testing. So I'll go here and I'll say /testing. Let me enter, and there you go. Well, the BR stop didn't work. That's not a problem. Might be because I put a slash here. Let me go to my test controller, and let me basically do what? Let me remove this slash from here. Let me say Command S. Let me stop my server again, and let me start it again so that I can show you the real changes, and after that I'll tell you basically what is happening right here. Right now my server has started, so I'll go here again, and again I'll hit the testing /testing till it didn't work. Okay, we'll figure it out later. But I can see here the old website name is Selenium Express, obviously, because whenever this particular let me maximize this, whenever the line number 23 got executed, we are printing the get website name. And obviously, first of all, inside my bean, inside this particular class, if I'll go here, the default website name is Selenium Express. So let me go back, let me come here. You can see default is Selenium Express and the updated website name is Selenium Express updated. So right now we have changed our website name. Just right here we did mybean.set website name, and right now again I'm writing that to my response. That's why I am able to get it right here. Okay, cool. So now the question is, if I'll go to my controller, if I'll open up my console here, you can see my bean object got created. That means whenever a new request come here called /testing, what basically happened, the my bean object got created. That's because we have defined the scope as request. Okay, so let's say if I'm going to hit this particular request again, then obviously if I'm going to refresh this particular page, or if I'm going to hit this request again, there will be a new request will go to my server. So basically if I'm going to copy this request, if I'll go to one of my web browser again, so let me go to a private window, and right here what I'm going to do, let me hit this request, let me do Command V, let me do enter. So right now it is a new request which went to my server. So right now again I'm expecting that my bean object will be created again, and obviously the result you can see Selenium Express, which is my old website name, and again you can see updated website name is Selenium Express updated. So right now if I will go to my server again, let me go to my server again. Right here you can see my bean object got created again. That's because I have hit this particular /testing request again. So there is a new request coming to my server, isn't it? So right now what I can do, let's say if I'll go to my mybean.java, let me basically go to my controller first. Okay, let's say that if I have another request mapping, okay, let me do Command C. And let me do Command V, and let's say I have another method here called test1, and the request mapping is testing2. Okay, let me say this testing1, and let me say this testing2. Let me say here, let me remove these two lines from here, and let's say I only have response.getWriter, and let me say here the website name is mybean.getWebsiteName. Okay, so basically what I want to show you that, let's say there are two requests. Okay, if we hit the first request here, my old website name was Selenium Express, then it was updated to Selenium Express updated. Right now the new website name it is going to print here is going to be Selenium Express updated. And after that, let's say if I'm going to hit this testing2 request, if basically it is the same my bean object, then I should get here Selenium Express updated, isn't it? Because I have changed it right here. Let's say whether it is happening or not. If it is not happening, that means whenever the testing2 request will come, it will be a new object. And if it will be a new object, then I can see the default value right here, which is Selenium Express only, right? Inside the get website name, you can see the default value will be populated, not the updated value, which is Selenium Express updated. So let me do Command S right now again, and let me wait till my server reload my changes. And after that, I'm going to hit both these requests so that it will be very clear. I mean, the concept will be very clear for you guys. So let me wait till my server reload the changes. Basically, my changes are not kicking off. Let me stop my server and let me restart it again. After this video, I'm going to restart my computer. It's actually, really slow right now. So let me restart my server first, and then I can hit both of these requests, testing1 and testing2. Well, my server is started. So first of all, right now let me go here, and first of all let me hit /testing. slash tasting1 because I have changed the URL mapping. Let me hit enter, and you can see my website name is Selenium Express, and it was right now updated to Selenium Express updated. And if I'll go to my Eclipse or to my STS, you can see that I have a MyBean object created, right? So if I'll go to my test controller, right now let me hit the tasting2 request and let me invoke the test1 method. And right now I'm expecting that if there will be a new object created for MyBean, then obviously the get website name will be again Selenium Express only. So let me go to my window, and right here, right now let me change this tasting1 to tasting2, and you can see the website name is Selenium Express. So I cannot see Selenium Express updated here. That's because it's a new request, so a new MyBean object got created. So if you go here to STS, right now you can see the MyBean object got created twice. So with each HTTP request, there is a new object getting created for MyBean. So before I wrap up this particular section, I want to tell you one more thing. If I'll go to MyBean, and right here, instead of saying scope value equal to request, I can also say, instead of hard coding this, I can say web application context dot, I can say scope request. You can see there is a scope here called scope request. Basically, without hard coding that, I can say web application context dot scope request. This one is basically stands for request. So you can see here, if I'll put my cursor here, this basically means a request. Okay. Or you can basically simplify this more. So what you can do, you can remove the complete line, and instead of this, you can say @request scope. You can say @request scope. This basically does mean that only. It means that you are basically creating a request scope for the MyBean, and you are actually activating the proxy inside it. So basically, @request scope does the exact same thing as this one. Okay, this particular line, value of scope request and proxy mode equal to target class. So it's up to you. You are going to write like this, or you are going to write like this. I feel this is more convenient to use, isn't it? So right now let me introduce the session scope. Okay, so let me say if I want to change the scope of this particular MyBean to session scope, then what is going to happen? Right now it is request scope, so basically I can remove it, and let me change this to scope equal to session, and let me check what is going to happen. Okay, so let me say the value for this is going to be session, or basically I can say web application context. I can say web application context dot session scope underscore session. Okay, and basically what it does mean that there will be only one MyBean object will be created, or the only time when the MyBean class is going to be instantiated when there is a new HTTP session for an user. Basically, let's say if we put scope equal to session here, there will be only one MyBean object for one HTTP session. Okay, so for one HTTP session, there will be only one MyBean object. So basically it does mean that if I'll go to my test controller, whenever there is a request comes in, let's say /testing, the MyBean object will be initialized for one time, and then it is going to be stored inside the session. So let's say right now when the /testing will be get invoked, first of all the website name here is Selenium Express, then we are changing it to Selenium Express Updated. So right now here it is going to show me Selenium Express Updated whenever I'm going to call the get website name again. Right now whatever the value that I have changed here, this value is going to be stored inside the session. So for the same user, there is no more mybean object will be created, and the same object will be given to the HTTP request or another incoming request if there is any. For an example, let's say /testing2 is coming right now, then obviously it is also using the mybean object, the same mybean object that I'll be getting right here, and the website name I'll be getting here is Selenium Express Updated. That's because I have changed the website name right here inside this particular request, and whenever there is a new request is going to come, obviously I'll get the same value right here because this mybean is basically pointing to the same object. Okay, so basically to make it happen I need to do one more thing, because to initialize the controller I need to give a proxy object to this one. I need to give a proxy object to mybean whenever this test controller will be initialized. At that time this dependency I need to make it a proxy. So I'll go to mybean.java, and right here I'll say proxy mode equal to target class. Okay, and there you go. Instead of saying this one, also you can say what? You can write a simpler annotation. You can write at session scope, just like at request scope. Okay, so let me try this one with by writing at session scope right here. Let me save my program. Let me wait till my server reload the changes, and once it's done I'm going to hit /testing1 followed by /testing2, and I'm going to see the behavior right here. Okay, so right now as you can see my server has started. So right now let me go to my web browser again. Let me go to my Safari browser, and first of all let me hit what? Let me hit testing1. Okay, let me hit enter. Okay, so right now it is saying my old website name was Selenium Express and the updated website name is Selenium Express Updated. Okay, this is the first request, and if I will go to my console, you can see that this is a new request. That means my mybean object got created. Okay, but the next time whenever I'm going to hit this request, there will be no new object will be created for mybean, because right now the scope for the mybean is basically session. It is just like a session, right? The scope is right now at session scope. So right now inside the test controller, if I'll come here, when I'm trying to fetch the website name again, whatever I have updated right here, the same website name I'll get right here. Okay, because this is basically the same object which is going to be fetched from the session. So let me go to my browser and let me say I'm going to hit testing2, and see here the website name is Selenium Express Updated. Okay, it's not Selenium Express right now, it's saying Selenium Express Updated. That's because I have changed the default name to Selenium Express Updated just right here. Okay, so right now your question will be when there will be a new object will be created. Okay, basically right now if I'll go to my Safari browser, let's say this is one particular user is using this particular browser. Now let's say if there is another user is using the Google Chrome browser. Okay, let me do a right click and let me open a new incognito window. Let me basically go to a new browser and let me paste the URL right here. So basically let me grab the URL from my Safari browser. Let me get the URL from here. Let me switch the browser to Google Chrome, and right now let me do Command V, and first of all let me hit the testing. Right now tell me what is going to be the result that I'm going to see. So if I'm going to hit it here, you can see a 404 not found page. Well, this is crazy because I have missed a 1 here. Let me say testing1, enter. You can see old website name is Selenium Express and the website name right now updated to Selenium Express updated. And if I'll go to my STS, you can see right now there should be a new object created. You can see my bean object got created again, and this is for a different user. Okay, and as this is for a different user, a fresh object got created. The old website name was whatever the default name, then it is updated to Selenium Express updated. And right now, again, if I'll go to my Google Chrome, again, and right now, if I'm going to hit testing 2, then obviously the website name will be Selenium Express updated. That's because we have updated it in the previous request. So hopefully it is clear right now how to use the session scope for a particular bean. Alright, so that's all about the session scope. Alright, so before I move to the next scope, there is another question for you, and people ask it a lot during your interview. So basically the question is, what is the difference between a request scope and a prototype scope? Okay, so let me prove that to you with a very simple example. First of all, let me do some cleanup work. Let me remove all these things because I do not need all these things. Let me remove everything. Right now, let's say this my bean object right here. If I'm going to annotate this with request scope, let's say request scope here. So right now the my bean object got a request scope. So right now if I'll go to my test controller, and let's say right now I do not need any auto wearing of this. Let me remove all this implementation. I will show you a new thing. Okay, so let's say I have my application context, and in this case it's a web application. So I have my web application context reference. So I'll say web application context, right? And I will make it auto where. So Spring will basically going to inject the web application context object to this. And right now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say context dot get bean. Okay, and what is my bean name? My bean name is my bean. Okay, so let me give a bean name here just to simplify this. I will say my bean, and let me copy this name. Let me go to my test controller. Let me paste it here, and let me say give me the my bean class object. So my bean dot class. Right now let me store this with a my bean instance. So I'll say my bean 1 is equal to this, and again let me grab the same object from the context, from the web application context. So I'll say my bean dot class, and I will change this to my bean 2. Okay, so right now tell me if I am going to do a sysout. Okay, if I'm going to do a sysout, the my bean 1, let me say my bean, oops, let me minimize this. Let me say here my bean 1 plus, and I'll give a space here, plus my bean 2. Okay, now what is going to happen? Okay, so basically whether I'll be getting the same instances or the different instance, that's my question. So right now straight away you are going to check this my bean class. Right now if I'll go here, it has a request scope, and what does the request scope says? Per one request, there will be only single instance of my bean will be created. And right now check here that inside my test controller, right here inside the slash testing request, I have these 2 lines. Right now, as long as I am there inside this particular request, doesn't matter how many times I'll try to get the my bean, there will be only one object returned to me. So my bean 1 and my bean 2 will be same. That's because I'm doing context.getBean inside the same request, which is testing 1. So till this particular scope, this request scope is not over, there will be only one my bean object will be created. So let me prove that. Let me do command S to save it, and let me save my bean class as well, and let me restart my server. and let me hit the request. So right now my server has started. So basically let me go to my web browser here and let me hit the testing one request. Let me do enter. Well, it is going to take some time because my server is slow and it's done. So right now if I'll go here, nothing got printed because it is still processing, I think. So right now you can see that the MyBean object got created, and right here you can see the references. Only one time the MyBean object got created, and the references or the hash code is same for the MyBean object, isn't it? That's because we are inside the same request, which is testing one. Okay, so right now inside the test controller, what I can do, I can have the same thing just like this, but the only thing that I'm going to do here, let me go to MyBean again and let me change this to prototype. So I'll say @scope, and I'm going to say value equal to prototype, and the proxy mode is going to be target. Alright, so right now let me go here again to my test controller and let me fire the same request. My reloading is completed. So right now let me fire the same testing one request. So I'll go to my web browser and let me hit the same request, and this time you are going to see that inside the test controller we will have two different objects right here, because the scope is prototype. It doesn't matter it is inside a same request or it is inside different request. So right now the MyBean object will be returned me by the context right here will be different. So it will be a new object and it will be a new object. So let me go here to my console, and you can see MyBean object got created for 2 times and the references right here are different. Okay, so hopefully if somebody is going to ask you the differences between the prototype scope and the request scope, you can answer well. Right now I'm going to tell you about the application scope. Okay, so as of now we understood about the singleton scope, prototype scope, request scope, and the session scope. So what about the application scope and how does it works? And guys, before I go for the application scope, let me tell you guys that right now I'm going to ask you a lot of things, and I am expecting that you should have a good foundation on Spring MVC. If you do not have, no worries. Go to my Spring MVC intermediate course and watch the first 3-4 videos. You should know how to configure a dispatcher servlet with a code-based approach. Okay, you should be able to understand when I say application context, servlet context, web application context. You should be familiar with these terms. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you guys to understand. The next thing, when I say something right now, do practice it by yourself. So as I have discussed how to set up a dispatcher servlet, how to set up dispatcher servlet with a code-based approach, I'm not going to repeat those things. I'm expecting that you already know about those things. And as I said, if you do not know it, you always have an option to watch my videos from the scratch. Okay, so go to the Spring MVC intermediate course, understand how to set up a dispatcher servlet with the code-based approach, what is a web.xml file, what is a servlet context, okay, and all these things. Okay, so right now let's go ahead. Okay, so right now let me walk you through with some fundamentals. Before I tell you about the application scope, let me ask you some very simple questions, right? Let me refresh your memory. Okay, so first of all, guys, tell me, let's say if you have a web application, think like I'm working with a web application. So when I work with a web application in Spring MVC, what is the first thing that I do? Obviously, you'll say, hey Vilash, we need to set up the dispatcher servlet. Okay. So first thing is we set up a dispatcher servlet. And when the dispatcher servlet gets initialized, I told you guys already, it looks for a configuration file. And that is our bean configuration file, isn't it? So the dispatcher servlet, when it gets initialized, it looks for a bean config file or a bean configuration file, isn't it? So what the dispatcher servlet does with the bean configuration file? So basically we define our beans here, our controllers here, we define the component scanning here, and we just define the complete configuration of our application right here. Okay. So this dispatcher servlet does what? It looks for the configuration file during the time of the boot off, and it reads this particular file, then it creates a web application context out of it, isn't it? So I told you, right, there are two terms. One is application context, one is web application context. So what is the difference between the application context and the web application context? This is for your normal IOC, for your normal standalone application. And the web application context is basically we use for web application, isn't it? So the dispatcher servlet does have a web application context. And how does it create the web application context? It creates by reading the configuration file, isn't it? Now tell me, this is the first question. Now tell me the second question that I'm going to ask. Can I set up multiple dispatcher servlet for an application? And the answer is, of course, yes. You can create as many dispatcher servlet as you want. If you want, you can create multiple dispatcher servlet also, right? But the thing to remember right here, if you're creating a multiple dispatcher servlet or if you're creating a new dispatcher servlet, again, this dispatcher servlet will look for a bean configuration file. Okay. So doesn't matter how many dispatcher servlet you are creating, but you should have a different bean config file for this dispatcher servlet. Right now, again, this dispatcher servlet will do what? It is going to read this configuration file and it is going to create a web application context out of it, right? So it will create a web application context. So the thing that I'm trying to prove here, I can set up multiple dispatcher servlet, and if I have multiple dispatcher servlet, I will have multiple web application context, isn't it? Okay, that's good. So right now the next thing, whenever I say application context, web application context, these classes or interfaces are provided by whom? Spring Framework, right? The application context, web application context, dispatcher servlet, these are related to the Spring Framework provided those interfaces and classes, isn't it? But right now, whenever I'm going to ask you about the servlet context, do you remember? I have spoken about the servlet context very deeply, during the start of my Spring MVC intermediate course. Also, I'll give you the link in the description. Anytime you are confused about it, you can go and look for this servlet context. Now, the servlet context is not related to Spring Framework, isn't it? This is related to the servlet API. The servlet context is related to servlet API. Web application context and application context, these are related to Spring Framework. That's good. So right now tell me, whenever we create any web application, let's say we are creating a dispatcher servlet 1, dispatcher servlet 2, just right here. All this dispatcher servlet, okay, with whom I am registering? Obviously, I am registering this dispatcher servlet with a servlet context. Or whenever I deploy my web application inside a server, okay, let's say I am deploying my web application inside a Tomcat server, or I am deploying my web application with a JBoss server. These servers comes with a servlet container, and this servers does have a servlet context, isn't it? The server does have a servlet context because the server does have a container, the servlet container, and the servlet container does have the servlet context. Right now, let's say we create dispatcher servlet 1, 2, 3, as many dispatcher servlet we want to create. In the end of the day, they are registered with the servlet context, isn't it? So with one servlet context, we can configure multiple dispatcher servlet. I want you to understand this term. This servlet context belongs to the servlet API. This dispatcher servlet belongs to Spring Framework. For a web application, where we deploy our web application, inside the server. And inside the server, we have the servlet context. So we are setting this dispatcher servlet with the servlet context. Okay, this much thing is clear. All right. So before I wrap up this particular conversation, okay, I feel that I'm having a conversation with you, just like a broadcast. So just guys, just tell me one thing. Whenever I talk about servlet context, okay, whenever I talk about this guy, servlet context here. So how many servlet contexts is there for one web application? Just imagine this particular scenario, right? You have your dispatcher servlet 1, you have your dispatcher servlet 2. All these dispatcher servlets are deployed inside the Tomcat server. And I'm going to ask you that how many servlet contexts you have right now? Obviously, the answer is 1. Okay, because servlet context we configure in the server level, right? Actually, we do not need to configure the servlet context. Our web server, just like Tomcat, configures the servlet context. Okay, so the servlet context is basically 1 per the web application. But what about the web application context? The web application context or the application context are multiple. This is per one dispatcher servlet, we will have one web application context. So we can have multiple web application contexts just right here, because one dispatcher servlet can have one web application context. Okay, this is the another thing that I want you guys to remember. Right now, let me show you another thing right here. So let me create a new file. I don't want to save this. Okay, now guys, the complete conversation I want to wrap up like this. Think like I have dispatcher servlet 1. Okay, this is, let's say, dispatcher servlet 1, and inside this dispatcher servlet 1 I have a web application context. I have dispatcher servlet 2. Okay, think like this is another dispatcher servlet. So dispatcher servlet 2, it has another web application context, isn't it? Cool. So similarly, I can have another dispatcher servlet. Let's say this is dispatcher servlet 3, and it also has a web application context, right? So web application context it has. Right now, think like all these dispatcher servlet are registered with a servlet context, right? So dispatcher servlet, end of the day, they will be registered with the servlet context in order to function, right? So let's say it has one servlet context, because all these things are running inside a server, and the server has a servlet context object, isn't it? Right now, think like I have a bean. Okay, let's say I have a class here, class test. Okay, now the default bean scope, let's say this test class does have a add component. Okay, right now think like this dispatcher servlet is scanning for this particular class. This dispatcher servlet is also scanning for this particular class, and this dispatcher servlet component scan is also scanning for this particular class. Okay, so now what is the default scope of this particular bean? Obviously, the default scope of this particular class or bean is singleton, isn't it? I told you very clearly about it. The default scope of this particular bean is singleton. And as I told you previously, when the default scope is singleton, per application context or per web application context, we have a copy of this test class. So this test does have a copy with here. This particular guy does have a new object for test class. This particular dispatcher servlet web application context does have a copy of the test class, right? So 3 different objects are there, isn't it? For this test class, there are 3 different objects, one with dispatcher servlet 3, one with dispatcher servlet 2, one with dispatcher servlet 1. I mean, in their web application context, we have a object created and new object created. But right now, I'll ask you one question. Let's think like I have another class. Let's say demo. My class name is demo. Let me remove this one. Okay, I have a class here, class demo, and this demo does have a add component. Oops, I cannot write it. Okay, add component with here. So with demo, I have a add component attached with this. And right now think like this dispatcher servlet is scanning this demo, this dispatcher servlet is scanning this demo, and also this dispatcher servlet is scanning this demo. But right now I am going to tell you one thing. Think like if I have something here called application scope. There is an annotation called application scope, or you can write application scope, or you can write here scope equal to application. Okay, I mean scope, inside parenthesis you can write value equal to application. So imagine that with this demo class I have given it a power, or I have annotated this particular class with application scope. Then what is going to happen? Now the thing is, when we make it application scope, right, now the demo class object will be created how many times? It will be created only one time. And right now this demo object will be attached here. Okay, so thing is, now the demo class object will be created only one time and will be attached with the servlet context. So whenever we define a class, just like demo here, whenever we define a class with application scope, then only one object will be created per servlet context. So that's why there is only one object is going to be created right here, and that will be attached with the servlet context. So right now, if you know this dispatcher servlet can access this object, this dispatcher servlet can access this object, this dispatcher servlet also can access this object, isn't it? Because servlet context is there in the global, right? It's in the global level. So right now, all the web application context that we have right here, they can, if they want, they can access this object. Okay, so if we set some global value to this object, then all this web application can access that particular value. Okay, but whenever we are making a class singleton, so for this web application, that is a different object. For this web application, it's a different object. For this web application, this is a different object, and this guy cannot access this object. This guy cannot access this object. Okay, or this guy cannot access this object, right? Because this web application is specific for this dispatcher servlet in the local level. But right here, whenever I'm making a bean with application scope, it is there in the global. So every dispatcher servlet web application context, if they want, they can access this object. I do not want to make it so much complicated. I hope it is pretty simple and you understand that. When we particularly make a bean application scope, it will be attached with the servlet context, and every dispatcher servlet can access that particular object. Okay. So right now, let me walk you through an example, and let me go to my STS. Okay, so right now let me walk you through an example. Basically, I'm not going to code it out. I have already coded it. So you can follow the same pattern, because I believe that is not a very complicated thing to do it. Because if you understand how to set up your dispatcher servlet by using the Java based approach, then you are ready to go, right? And if you do not know how to set up dispatcher servlet by using Java code, then you can go ahead and can watch videos on my channel. It's already available, configuring dispatcher servlet with Java based approach. So basically, let me tell you right now, what the heck I did right here. First of all, I have two different dispatcher servlet. Okay, let me tell you that. And first of all, let me come one by one. First of all, let me show you the two details that I have right here, or two bins that I have here inside my API package. I have two different bins, right? So the first bin that I have here, let me open this up. Guys, just bear with me a little because my mouse is not functioning. So let me open this. Okay, so right now, if you see this particular bin, right now this bean name is application scope test. Okay, and as you can see, I have annotated this particular bean with 8 application scope annotation. So basically right now this bean, once it got created, it will be attached with the servlet context. So if we will set any data inside this application scope test class, then it will be visible to the servlet context. So you can see I have taken a variable here called int number. Basically right now this number is set to 0. Right, we are going to change this value later. So just imagine that we have a class here called application scope test, and right now I have given it a scope called application scope. Okay, just understand this much. We are going to see this particular class in action. Right now, let me open this particular class called Singleton test. So this is again a simple class. Let me zoom it. So this is again a simple class, nothing fancy here. I have just annotated this class with add component annotation. So this is the bean, and I have not defined any scope here for this particular class. So the default scope for this bean will be singleton, right? And inside this particular class, again, I have a variable here, which is of int type, and that is been set to 0. So the default value is anyhow 0, but I have set it explicitly right here. So I have two bean. One is application scope test, and it has the application scope right here. One is singleton test, and this singleton test does have a singleton scope here. Okay, so right now let's do one thing. Let me walk you through some other classes that I have inside this packages, MVC1 and MVC2. So what I did here, let me open this, and right now you can see with each of these particular packages, I have an app config and I have an initializer. So this app config is basically the bean configuration file, and this initializer is basically your dispatcher servlet. So let's say I am going to open the application initializer one. So basically what I have done here, I have just set up my dispatcher servlet. So let me zoom this and let me minimize this. So guys, just try to understand here what I'm trying to say. Do not see a lot of code and do not get confused. So basically I did set up my dispatcher servlet right here for my app. Okay, so you can see it implements the web application initializer interface. That's why I have overridden this on startup method, and the on startup method does have a servlet context. So right now with this servlet context, I am going to attach a dispatcher servlet. Okay, so basically what I have done here, you can see I have created a web application context. Okay, and I have registered my application configuration class right here. In this case, this is app config 1. So if I'll go into this particular class, if I'll click here app config 1, you can see first of all this app config 1 is here. If I click here to link to editor, it is here inside the MVC1 package, this class, right? And this particular class, let me minimize this again. This particular class does nothing. It is just doing the component scanning. Okay, it is component scanning the API package and the MVC1 package. Okay, I'll tell you why I'm doing a component scanning to the MVC1 package and the API package. First of all, the API package here, I have the API package here. I have couple of bean. I told you, right? Application scope test and singleton test. These two bean. So this application config 1 is scanning these two beans right here. Okay, and the next thing here is it is also scanning the MVC1. Why I'm scanning the MVC1? Because inside the MVC1 package, I have a controller. That's why I'm scanning that. Okay, I'll come back to this particular point later. So this is my application config 1 file. Okay, so let me close this one. So right now here you can see inside my on startup method, I have registered my application config 1. So the dispatcher servlet will read this particular file and it is going to create a web application context out of this particular file. Okay, so right now here I'm creating my dispatcher servlet object. You can see dispatcher servlet, new dispatcher servlet, and I'm passing the web application context. And this web application context is basically my application context object, whatever I'm setting just right here, the app config file. With this application context or web application context, I'm setting the bean configuration file, and here I'm passing that whenever my dispatcher servlet is getting initialized. Okay, so my dispatcher servlet will need a bean configuration file during the initialization. I told you that already. And once my dispatcher servlet object got created right here, what I'm doing, I'm registering the dispatcher servlet with the servlet context. They can see with the servlet context with this object. I told you, right, in my own startup method, here I have servlet context object I'm getting here. So with this servlet context, I'm doing what? I am setting my dispatcher servlet. So you can see R servlet. I've given a name to my dispatcher servlet, which is dispatcher servlet 1. And then I am passing the dispatcher servlet reference, this reference. Here I'm creating my dispatcher servlet, right? So this reference I'm passing here. Okay. Hope you understand this. Basically, inside this particular class, application initializer 1, I am creating a dispatcher servlet object, and I am giving it a name called my dispatcher servlet 1, and this my dispatcher servlet 1 will handle this particular URL. I have set it right now, application 1/star. Okay, so whenever any request will come to my web application starting from application 1, then this is the dispatcher servlet. This is the dispatcher servlet, which is my dispatcher servlet 1 is going to handle this request. Okay, as simple as that. I hope you guys understand this. So there you go. So right now let me close this application initializer 1. Okay, so right now for this MVC1, I have a controller class, and I'm going to come back to this controller class later. First of all, let me minimize this particular package, and let me minimize this particular package as well. Now let me show you what I have inside the MVC2. So inside the MVC2 right now, again, I have another dispatcher servlet set up right here. So let me open up this particular file. Okay, so I have a application initializer 2 file, and here basically I'm setting off another dispatcher servlet. So let me minimize it for a moment. Okay, so right now, first of all, again, I'm creating another web application context, because if I'm creating a new dispatcher servlet, this dispatcher servlet will need a web application context again to get initialized. So you can see I am passing the web application context object inside the dispatcher servlet parenthesis. That's why I'm creating the web application context object right here. Then I am giving it a bean configuration file, and in this case I'm saying this app config 2. Okay, and this app config 2 is here. It is here inside the MVC2 package. So for MVC1 I have a app config, and for MVC2 package I have also a different app config. Let me open this up. You can see this is same file, and here what I want to do, here basically I need to set up my best package. I have not set it yet. Let's say I want to scan for this API package and this MVC2 package, because inside the MVC2 also I have a controller, right? So let me do what? Let me say com.seleniumexpress.api. All good. So this app config 2 does have a component scanning. Again, it is going to scan for the API package, and also it is going to scan for the MVC2 package. Inside the MVC2, I have this controller 2. That's why I'm scanning the MVC2 package also, because I want my controller to be get scanned. Okay, so right now let me close this app config 2 file, and right here in the application initializer 2, I have created my app config 2, registered that with my web application context, creating a new dispatcher servlet object right here, and with my servlet context right now, which is this object, with my global servlet context, I am adding another dispatcher servlet. You can see my dispatcher servlet 2, and I am passing in the dispatcher servlet reference, which is this one. Alright, so once I set my new dispatcher servlet, which is dispatcher servlet 2, I'm giving it a bean configuration file. I'm a mapping, let's say application 2 in this case. Previous one, if you see right here inside the MVC1, I have given it a URL pattern MVC1. If I'll go here, initializer 1 to this dispatcher servlet, you can see here the mapping that I have is application 1. Here the mapping that I have is application 2. That means any request starting from /application2 is going to come to my web application. This is the dispatcher servlet is going to handle that. Okay, and if I'll go to application initializer 1, any request is going to come to my web application starting from application 1, then this is the dispatcher servlet which is going to handle that. Hopefully the concept is clear. Now let me close the application 1 dispatcher servlet, application 2 dispatcher servlet, and right now this is the primary setup that I did. So hopefully you guys can go ahead and can do that. So remember that for the MVC1 package, I have an application config file or my bean configuration file and a dispatcher servlet setup file. And for MVC2, I have an application config file and a dispatcher servlet file. Okay, that's it. Right now, let me do what? Let me go to the controller one, and this controller one is there inside my MVC1 package. So let me show you what I have done here. So let me open this up. Let me double click here. So right here inside this controller1 class, what I did here, this controller1 is there inside the MVC1 package. That's the only thing you need to understand right now. Let me minimize this. This is a very simple class, right? So I told you, right, I have two bins. One is application scope test, one is singleton test. So basically what I did here in the controller1, so I have a request mapping here. First of all, top level request mapping, which is /app1. And right now I have created two references. One is from my application scope test, one is for my singleton test, right? And I have auto-wired both of this. Okay. So right now what I did, I have changed the default value for the app scope test and the singleton test. So if you understand here, so if you see here inside the application scope test, I have a variable here called number 0. Okay, and inside the singleton test also I have a variable here called number 0. So right now if I'll go to my controller1, you can see here I'm doing here what inside this particular request mapping method, I'm doing what, I am changing the value. So for the application scope test, the default value I have changed it to 5. For the singleton test class, I have also changed the default value to 5, the number to 5. This particular number that I have in both of my class, I have assigned it a value called 5. Okay, so whenever this particular request mapping is going to be executed, which is there inside my controller1, and this controller1 is there inside my MVC1 package, at that time I'll do what? Whenever this particular request mapping will execute, these values will be changed for both the application scope test class and the singleton test class. Okay, and then I'm just printing the value. The application value is whatever the value that I have changed, and the singleton value is whatever the value that I have changed here. Okay, hopefully you understand this. Nothing complicated right here. So now let me show you the another controller class that I have. So if I'll go to my MVC2 package right now, inside here also I have a controller2 class, isn't it? So I'll do what? I'll go to my controller2 class and open this up. And right now you can see again, I have done the same thing. Here also I have the application scope test reference and the singleton test reference. And here I am basically not doing anything. I'm just trying to access those values. So for this request mapping, okay, so this request mapping is there inside the controller2, and this controller2 is inside this MVC2 package. It has a root level request mapping /app2, and right here it has another request mapping where basically I'm trying to access the value. So I'm accessing the application test value right here, application scope test.get number, and the singleton scope test.get number. So basically what I'm trying to do right now, let me explain you that. So guys, right now understand here, inside this controller1, this controller1 is there inside the MVC1 package, isn't it? This is the controller 1. And this controller 1 is initialized by this particular dispatcher servlet, isn't it? So right here, what I'm trying to do, I am changing the default value for my application scope test class value and also my singleton scope test class value. But the point to note here, this application scope test, this particular object will be only created once. Why? Because this particular class does have a application scope defined right here, right? So this bean scope is application scope. So once this bean got created, it is going to be attached with the servlet context. So right now let me come to my controller 1. So here, whenever I have changed the application scope test value, once the value is changed, this object will be there inside the servlet context. So right now, if I'll go to my controller 2 and see that right now this controller 2 is here inside the MVC2, inside this particular package, and this controller is getting initialized and it is there inside a different web application context, isn't it? Because this particular controller is initialized by a different dispatcher servlet which has a different web application context. So my point here is inside the controller 2, inside this controller 2 right now, if I will be able to access the application scope test value, whatever I set inside the controller 1 here, whatever the value that I have set right here, if I can access that right here inside the controller 2, that means that, right now this app scope test, I am getting it from the servlet context, because this particular object, this app scope object, which is this one, is right now attached with my servlet context. But right now inside the controller 1, also I am setting the singleton value, right? The singleton test, if you see this particular class, here also, if I'll go here, I have a number here which is set to 0. But this particular bean scope is singleton, isn't it? So if the bean scope is singleton, let's say if I have 5 different web application contexts, then it will be having 5 different new objects, right? Let's say right now inside this MVC1, if I will go to this appconfig1 class, you can see right here, I am doing a scanning for the API package, right? That means inside this API package, this singleton test is there. So this object for singleton test will be created and will be stored inside the web application context. Right now, again, see, inside this MVC2, I have appconfig2. And inside the appconfig2, again, I'm scanning for the API package. Then again, the singleton test object will be created and it will be stored inside a different web application context, right? So if I have 10 appconfig files just like this, then 10 singleton test object will be created, isn't it? But what about the application scope test? As we have the application scope right here, only one time the object for this particular class will be created and that will be attached to the servlet context. Okay, so right now let me go ahead and let me access the controller 1 request mapping method. Right here, let me access this particular method which is going to set some values to my application scope test number and the singleton scope test number. Okay, and then inside the controller 2, which is there inside a different app, let me access this access value and let me check that what is the result that I'm getting for the app scope test get number and the singleton test get number, right? So this value will be defaulted again to 0, but this application scope value, I'll be getting whatever I set in the different app. That's because this particular value, once I set, it is going to be set to the servlet context, right? So right now, let me go ahead and let me run this particular project. Okay, so right now let's go ahead and observe the console here, what happened. So let me drag this a little. And you can see, first of all, my dispatcher servlet 1 got initialized. Okay, whenever it got initialized, the singleton test constructor got called. That's because if you see the singleton test, if you see my singleton test class, where it is, singleton test, this one. Let me open this up. If you see this class, I have a constructor here. So whenever my application initializer 1, whenever this particular class got initialized, whenever this particular dispatcher servlet got created, also it has created a web application context from this app-config1 file. And this app-config1 file, if you'll go here, it is reading the API package, isn't it? And inside this API package, I have the singleton test class. And that's why in the log, you can see there is an object created for the singleton class whenever my dispatcher servlet 1 got executed, because it has a different web application context, and similarly my dispatcher servlet 2 got initialized and it has a different web application context, and the singleton constructor again got called because the singleton test class is also there inside the my dispatcher servlet 2 web application context, right? So there are two web application contexts right now, one for the my dispatcher servlet 2 and one for the my dispatcher servlet 1. Alright guys, but here I have one question. Okay, so if you'll go to this API package, okay, this API package is also scanned by both MVC1 and MVC2, right? So also we have a class here called application test. So if I'll go to this application test class, it also has a add component annotation, isn't it? This particular class does have a add component annotation. Then why it is not scanned by both my dispatcher servlet 1 and my dispatcher servlet 2? Why the object of this particular class didn't got created? Because here also we have a constructor, right? If the object would have created, this constructor would have called and we would have get application scope test constructor in my console. But I have not got it even for one time. And that's because whenever we'll be needing this particular class, whenever we'll be needing the instance of this particular class, at that time only this particular class object will be created, and it will be only be created for one time, and then it will be stored inside the servlet context, not inside the web application context. Okay, so let me show you how. First of all, let's say let me go to my controller 1, where it is here, this one. So let me access this particular method, okay, this particular test method. Let me go ahead and let me access this particular method by hitting this particular URL. Okay, and this will basically change the default value for the number integer that I have inside my app scope test class and inside my singleton test class. Okay, so let me execute this, and the URL for this will be /change default value. And the root URL is /application1, and this controller 1 is there inside the MVC1 package. So the root URL for this will be, if I'll go into this dispatcher servlet, the root URL for this will be /application1/star, right? So let me access that. So I will go to the root URL and I'm gonna type /application1. This is my dispatcher servlet URL. Then my controller 1 URL, the controller 1 root URL is /app1 and followed by /change default value. So I'll say /app1 /change default value. Okay, this is the URL, and let me hit enter. So right now we can see couple of things. First of all, my application test value is changed to 5. The singleton value is also changed to 5. And you can also see my application scope test constructor also got called. That means my application scope test class object got created, and right now the value is also set to my application scope test integer value, which is 5. So right now my application scope test object is there inside my servlet context. But here note that my singleton test value is also changed to 5, but this object is inside the web application context of my application 1 URL, which is belongs to the dispatcher servlet 1. Right now, let me access these values again inside a different controller. Right now, I'll go to the controller 2, which is there inside my MVC2 package, right? So if I'll go here, you can see the request mapping for this is app2 and then access value, and the root URL for the dispatcher servlet. If I'll go to the application initializer 2, the root URL is /application2. Okay, so let me go here. Note that both the value is right now 5 and 5. Now let me go here and let me change this URL. I will say application 2, app2, and then it is access value, right? controller 2, this is access value. Let me access the value. Let me hit enter and you can see the magic right here. Now the application test value is 5, which is fetched from the servlet context, but the singleton test value is 0. That's because for this controller 2 is there inside a different web application context, because this controller 2 belongs to app-config 2 and this app-config 2 belongs to the initializer 2. It belongs to a different dispatcher servlet. So for this dispatcher servlet, it has a different web application context, and inside this dispatcher servlet, it has a new object for the singleton test, and that's why the value here is 0, but this particular application scope test value is retrieved from the servlet context. That's why the value is 5. Practice it one time so that you can understand it really well. So these are the classes you need to create, and this is the structure you need to follow. Alright, so before I wrap up this particular session, I just want to tell you that there is another scope that's called a WebSocket. So guys, if you understand, as of now, we have spoke about prototype, singleton, request, session, and the application scope. So there is one more that's called a WebSocket scope, and obviously it is related to the WebSocket Spring programming. So as of now, I did not introduce WebSocket to you. So I just want you to know about this particular scope. So basically there is a scope called WebSocket. Let me tell you that how to activate it, and I'm going to give you the practical example later. So to activate the WebSocket scope, you just need to write a scope. So this is how you can activate the WebSocket scope for this particular bean called WebSocket demo. So basically I'll tell more about it, what is the real-time usage of that. But for now, you can understand that once you activated the WebSocket scope, there will be only one instance for this particular class called WebSocket demo will be created, and that will be stored inside the WebSocket session. And the same instance of this particular bean will be returned as long as you will be there inside the WebSocket session. I'll tell more about it later, but right now just understand that we have also a scope called WebSocket. Okay. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any queries, any question, do post a comment in the comment section. Do let me know about your problem so that I can understand that and I can help you. If you have watched it completely, then I want to say you a big thank you. Thank you very, very much for watching this video. I really appreciate that. And I know you are very keen of learning things, and I really feel proud that, okay, I made you understand something, okay? I don't know, just let me know about it. So I feel really good that you have watched the video till the end, right? So that's really good. I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to like the video if you have enjoyed it. Do dislike if you feel that this can be improved. Do let me know. Just don't dislike, because if you are going to dislike, I'm not going to know about it. What basically went wrong? You just let me know that, hey Abhilash, this is the problem, this is why I'm disliking. Just improve it. Maybe next time I'll be liking your videos, right? So yeah, so just let me know about the problem. If you are facing any kind of issues with this particular videos, if you find okay, these things can be improved, just let me know about it, and obviously I'm going to work on that. So thank you very, very much guys for the support, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, bye bye, take care, happy coding, and yes, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.